Nelson Messias, The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor. A memoir of devotion, survival, and the light that never left. Copyright C, 2026 by Nelson Messias. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored, or transmitted in any form or by any means. Electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, scanning, or otherwise without written permission from the publisher. It is illegal to copy this book, post it to a website, or distribute it by any other means without permission. Nelson Messias has no responsibility for the persistence or accuracy of URLs for external or third-party internet websites referred to in this publication, and does not guarantee that any content on such websites is or will remain accurate or appropriate. First edition. This book was professionally typeset on Readsy. Find out more at readsy.com for Nora Aunor, whose truth shaped my life, for her children who carry her legacy, for my mother who gave me strength, and for the fans who kept her light alive. This book is for all who loved her, all who learned from her, and all who found themselves reflected in her eyes. May mga tinig na hindi natin nakikilala, pero kailanman ay hindi natin nalilimutan. There are voices we never meet, yet never forget. NKM Contents Acknowledgements our Author's Note. Prologue 1. Acknowledgements. To the people who shared their stories of her, co-stars, directors, friends, and strangers, your memories helped me understand the woman behind the legend. Your kindness filled the spaces I could never reach. To the Filipino community and here and abroad, thank you for reminding me that identity is not lost in distance. It lives in memory, in language, in heart. To the readers, thank you for walking with me through grief, through admiration, through healing, through truth. This book is not just mine. It belongs to everyone who loved her, everyone who learned from her, everyone who carries her light. To the quiet moments, the small joys, the gentle days, thank you for teaching me that peace is possible after a lifetime of storms. And to the life I continue to build, thank you for giving me space to honor the woman who shaped my IV. Author's Note. I wrote this book not as a critic, not as a historian, not as an insider, but as someone whose life was touched by a woman he never met. This is not a biography. This is not a chronicle. This is not a record of facts. This is a testament to empathy, to admiration, to humanity, to the invisible threads that connect us to the people who shape us. I wrote this book to honor her truth, but I also wrote it to honor my own. Her story taught me that greatness is not perfection. Greatness is authenticity. Greatness is courage. Greatness is the willingness to be human in a world that demands otherwise. If this book has one purpose, it is this: to remind you that the people we love, even from afar, can change the course of our lives. And sometimes that is enough. By prologue, the woman who became my light. Before the world taught me who I was supposed to be, before poverty carved its lessons into my childhood, before migration reshaped my life, there was a woman whose voice reached me through a small, flickering television screen. Her name was Nora Aunor. To the nation, she was a superstar, the national artist. The voice that rose from the slums, the actress who carried the wounds of the Filipino people in her eyes, the woman who proved that greatness can come from the humblest beginnings, Nora Aunor. The greatest actress of Philippine cinema, Nora Aunor, born Nora Cabaltera Villamayor, is widely regarded as the greatest actress in Philippine cinema, a title earned through more than 170 films across 5 decades and a body of work defined by patriotic, feminist, and socially charged roles. She was officially conferred the honor of National Artists for Film and Broadcast Arts in 2022. The highest artistic won The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor recognition in the country. She is also the most awarded Filipino actress in history, holding record numbers of Best Actress wins from the country's major award-giving bodies, including FAMAS, Gawad Urian, MMFF, Luna Awards, Star Awards, and more. Internationally, she achieved what no other Filipino actor has: acting awards across 5 continents, including Best Actress wins at the Cairo International Film Festival, Brussels International Film Festival, Asia Pacific Screen Awards, Asian Film Awards, and the Bisato d'Oro at the Venice Film Festival. Her performances in Tatlong Taong Walang Diyos, Minsay Isang Gamu-Gamu, Ina Ka ng Anak Mo, Himala, Bulaklak, sa City Jail, The Floor, Contemplacion Story, Bona, and Thy Womb are considered among the finest in world cinema. Roles that transformed her from a performer into a cultural force. Across her career, critics, scholars, and audiences alike have called her the superstar, the grand dame of Philippine cinema, and the artist whose eyes alone could carry the weight of a nation. But to me, she was something else. She was a lifeline. I was a boy with very little, no wealth, no certainty, no map for the future. But when I watched her on screen, I saw someone who looked like us, someone brown-skinned and small, someone who came from nothing and still shone brighter than anyone. To prologue. She taught me that dreams were not reserved for the rich. She taught me that survival could be an art. She taught me that truth, spoken softly, could still move mountains. Through her films, the heartbreak of Bona, the fire of Ina Ka ng Anak Mo, the quiet ache of Bakit Bughaw ang Langit, the devastation of Tatlong Taong Walang Diyos, the injustice of Bulaklak sa City Jail, I learned the many faces of strength. I did not know her, she did not know me, but she shaped me in ways no one else ever did. This book is not about fame. It is not about celebrity. It is about a boy who found hope in a woman who carried the nation's wounds with dignity. It is about the light she gave me. A light I carried across oceans, across years, across every version of myself. This is the story of why I dreamed of Nora Aunor, and how that dream helped me survive. 3. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor 4:1, Chapter 1. The photograph I never let go. I was still a boy when I first saw her. Not on a screen, not on a stage, but standing there in front of me, close enough that I could hear the softness of her voice and feel the gentleness she carried like a second skin. I didn't know what to say. How do you speak to someone who shaped the way you survived your own life? How do you stand in front of a woman who rose from the same kind of poverty you were still drowning in? I only remember that my hands were shaking when we took the picture. She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't need to be rehearsed. And for a moment I felt something I had never felt before, that I mattered, that I belonged in the same world as she did. I didn't have the words for it then, but looking back, I think that was the first time I understood what hope felt like. I kept that photograph. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor. I kept it through every move, every heartbreak, every small victory I fought for with my own hands. I kept it when life was cruel, when dreams felt too far, when I wondered if people like us were meant to stay in the shadows. The picture yellowed with time, the edges softened, but I never let it go. It was more than a memory. It was a reminder of who I wanted to become. Because before I ever dreamed of writing a book, before I ever learned how to stand up for myself, before I ever believed I could build a life beyond the limits of my childhood, I dreamed of being like her. Not a superstar, not a legend, but someone who could rise without forgetting where they came from. Someone who could turn pain into strength. Someone who could make the world listen even when they spoke softly. I was a boy from a poor family, just like she once was. And when I looked at her, I saw the proof that beginnings do not decide endings. People say you shouldn't idolize anyone, but they never grew up the way we did. They never knew what it meant to cling to a voice, a face, a story, because it was the only thing that told you your life could be different. Nora Aunor wasn't just a star to me. She was a map, a compass, a quiet promise that I wasn't trapped in the life I was born into. That day we met lasted only a few minutes, but it shaped the next 30 years of my life. 6, Chapter 1. And now as I begin this book, I return to that moment. The boy I was, the woman she was, and the photograph that survived everything with me. This is not just her story, it is mine too. And it is the story of every Filipino who grew up with nothing but a dream and the courage to chase it. This is the story of the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. 7. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. 8. Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The boy who found a mirror. Long before I met her, long before that photograph became the anchor of my life, I was just a boy trying to survive each day. Our house was small, the kind of small that teaches you early how to make yourself even smaller. Money was always short. Food was sometimes a question. Dreams felt like luxuries meant for other people. The ones born into comfort, the ones who didn't have to count coins before riding a jeepney. But even then, even in the tightness of those days, I carried a strange kind of hope. I didn't know where it came from. Maybe from the radio that played in the neighbor's window. Maybe from the posters taped to Sari Sari stores. Maybe from the way people spoke her name with a mixture of pride and longing. Nora Aunor, the girl from Iriga who became a superstar. I didn't understand fame then. I didn't understand Cinema 10 Chapter 2, or awards, or the weight of being loved by a nation. What I understood was this. She looked like us. She sounded like us. She came from the same kind of hunger we knew too well. And yet she stood on stages I could only imagine, her voice rising above the noise of the world. For the first time, I saw someone who made poverty look survivable. When you grow up poor, you learn to hide your dreams. You tuck them away so no one can laugh at them. You pretend you don't want too much. You train yourself to be grateful for scraps. But every time I saw her face, on TV, on magazine covers, on the lips of people who adored her, something inside me refused to stay small. She was a mirror, not of who I was, but of who I could be. I didn't want to be famous. I didn't want the lights or the applause. What I wanted was her courage, the way she stood in front of the world without apology, the way she carried her brown skin like a crown, the way she turned silence into strength. People like us were taught to lower our eyes. She taught me to lift mine. I remember watching her in Himalaya for the first time. I didn't understand everything, but I understood her eyes, the pain in them, the truth in them, the way she could break your heart without saying a word. I thought, if she can speak without 11, and the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor speaking, maybe I can survive without shouting for help. She became my quiet teacher, my invisible mentor, my proof that beginnings do not decide endings. And so I grew up with her shadow beside me, not heavy, not dark, but guiding. When life was cruel, I thought of her. When I felt small, I remembered her. When I doubted myself, I looked at the photograph we took together and saw the boy I used to be, standing beside the woman who taught him how to dream. This chapter of my life, the years before I met her, was shaped by struggle, but it was also shaped by the slow, steady realization that I was allowed to want more, that I was allowed to rise, that I was allowed to dream, even if the world told me otherwise, because she did, and if she could, maybe I could too. Chapter 3. The country that loved her and the boy who needed her. Before I understood what acting was, I understood what it meant to be seen. Not by the people around me, they were too busy surviving, but by someone on a screen who didn't even know I existed. Someone who carried the same brown skin, the same hunger, the same quiet fire that lived inside so many of us who grew up with nothing. The Philippines loved Nora Aunor long before I did, but the way the country loved her was different from the way I did. For many, she was a superstar, the face on posters, the voice on the radio, the woman whose movies filled cinemas from Manila to the smallest towns. She was the pride of a nation that rarely saw itself reflected in its own dreams. She was proof that greatness could come from the margins. 13. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. But for me, she was something else entirely. She was the first person who made me believe that my life could be more than the circumstances I was born into. When you grow up poor, the world teaches you to shrink, to stay quiet, to accept your place. But every time I watched her, Whether she was singing, crying, or simply standing still with those eyes that held entire storms, I felt something inside me expand. She didn't just act, she didn't just perform. She carried the weight of people like us, and she carried it with dignity. I remember watching her in Minsai Sang Gamu Gamu. I didn't understand politics then. I didn't understand the history behind the story. But I understood her voice when she said, "My brother is not a pig." It wasn't just a line. It was a cry for every Filipino who had ever been stepped on, ignored, or treated as less. And I thought, that's how I want to live, with that kind of truth. The country adored her because she was a phenomenon. I adored her because she was a lifeline. There were days when life felt too heavy, when the bills piled up, when the future looked like a long, dark road. When I wondered if I would ever escape the cycle I was born into. On those days, I would take out the photograph we took together. I would look at the boy I used to be, standing beside the woman who taught him how to dream, and I would remind myself that survival was possible. Chapter 3. Not because she saved me, but because she showed me how to save myself. The Philippines loved her loudly, with applause, with awards, with crowds that filled entire streets. I loved her quietly, in the privacy of my struggles, in the silence of my fears, in the small victories I fought for because she taught me to keep going. And maybe that's why her story mattered so much to me. Because it wasn't just her rise that inspired me. It was her resilience, her ability to fall, to break, to be judged, to be misunderstood, and still rise again. She was not perfect, but she was real, and that made her even more powerful. As I grew older, I realized something. The country loved her because she was a star, but I loved her because she was a mirror, reflecting not who I was, but who I could become. This chapter of my life, the years when I began to understand her impact, not just on me, but on an entire nation, taught me that dreams are not selfish. They are survival. They are rebellion. They are the quiet refusal to stay small. And in loving her, I learned to love the possibility of myself. Chapter 4, Becoming the Dream I Borrowed. Here comes a moment in every young life when admiration turns into something deeper. When the person you look up to stops being just a star and becomes a part of your own story. For me, that moment arrived slowly, like dawn creeping into a dark room. I didn't notice it at first. I only knew that every time I saw Nora Aunor on screen, something inside me shifted, softened, strengthened. I didn't want to be famous. I didn't want the lights or the applause. What I wanted was her courage. I wanted the way she stood in front of the world, without apology. I wanted the way she carried her brown skin like a quiet rebellion. I wanted the way she turned silence into power. Growing up, I didn't have many examples of people who looked like me succeeding. Most of the faces on TV were fair-skinned, tall, polished. The kind of beauty that felt unreachable for a boy come chapter 4. Like me. But then there was Nora. Small, brown, soft-spoken. A girl from poverty who rose higher than anyone expected. She didn't fit the mold. She broke it. And in breaking it, she gave people like me permission to dream. I didn't realize it then, but I was borrowing her strength. Every time life pushed me down, I reached for the memory of her. Every time I felt small, I remembered how she stood tall. Every time I doubted myself, I looked at the photograph we took together, the one I kept safe for more than 30 years, and I saw the boy I used to be, standing beside the woman who taught him how to rise. That photograph became more than a keepsake. It became a reminder of who I wanted to become. Not a superstar, not a legend, but someone who could survive with dignity. Someone who could face the world with the same quiet fire she carried in her eyes. There were days when I felt like giving up, when the weight of poverty, responsibility, and expectation felt too heavy to carry. But then I would think of her journey, the auditions she lost, the criticisms she endured, the battles she fought behind the scenes. She wasn't just a success story. She was a survivor. And if she could survive, Maybe I could too. Teen, the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. Slowly, without realizing it, I began to shape myself around the lessons I learned from watching her. I learned to work harder than anyone expected. I learned to stay humble even when I succeeded. I learned to keep going even when the world said no. I learned that dreams are not inherited. They are earned. They are fought for. They are held onto with both hands. And so the boy who once dreamed of being like Nora Aunor grew into someone who carried her lessons in his bones. Someone who understood that greatness is not measured by fame, but by resilience. Someone who learned that the most powerful victories are the quiet ones, the ones no one sees, the ones you win alone. This chapter of my life, the years when admiration became identity, taught me that heroes do not save us. They show us how to save ourselves. And in her story, I found the courage to write my own. Chapter 5. Learning to fight the way she did. To hear are battles you inherit and there are battles you choose. Growing up poor meant I inherited more than my share. The kind of struggles that arrive before you're ready. The kind that teach you to grow up faster than you should. But somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't have to face them alone. I had a guide, even if she didn't know my name. I learned to fight by watching her. Not the loud kind of fight, not the kind that demands attention, but the quiet, steady kind, the kind that survives. When I watched Nora Aunor on screen, I saw a woman who carried her wounds with grace. She didn't hide them. She didn't pretend they weren't there. She let them speak through her eyes, through the tremble of her voice, through the stillness of her body. She taught me that strength isn't always loud, sometimes it ain't. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. It's the silence that saves you. As I grew older, life became heavier. Responsibilities piled up. Dreams felt farther away. The world expected me to stay small, to accept the life I was born into. But every time I felt myself shrinking, I remembered her. I remembered the girl from Iriga who sold water at the train station. I remembered the young singer who stood on the tawag ng tanghalan stage with nothing but her voice and her courage. I remembered the actress who broke beauty standards simply by existing. I remembered the woman who faced criticism, heartbreak, and betrayal, and still rose. And I thought, if she could fight, then so can I. There were days when I felt like giving up, when the weight of poverty, work, and expectation felt too heavy to carry. But then, I would take out the photograph we took together, the one I kept safe for more than 30 years. I would look at the boy I used to be, standing beside the woman who taught him how to dream, and I would remind myself that survival was possible, not because she saved me, but because she showed me how to save myself. I learned to endure the way she did, quietly, with dignity. I learned to rise the way she did, slowly but surely. I learned to believe the way she did, fiercely, even when the world doubted her. Chapter 5. People often say that celebrities shouldn't be role models, but they never grew up the way we did. They never knew what it meant to cling to someone else's courage because you didn't have your own yet. She wasn't just a star to me, she was a blueprint for survival. And as I faced my own battles, the long nights, the disappointments, the moments when I felt invisible, I carried her story like armor. She taught me that pain is not a dead end, it is a beginning. It is the place where strength is born. This chapter of my life, the years when I learned to fight the way she did, shaped the person I became. Not a superstar, not a legend, but someone who refused to stay small. Because she didn't, and in her courage, I found my own. Chapter 6. The roles that taught me who we are. To hear are films you watch, and there are films that watch you back. Films that see your fears, your dreams, your wounds, and reflect them with a truth you didn't know you needed. Nora Aunor made many great movies, but 4 of them carved themselves into my life like quiet revelations. They weren't just stories. They were mirrors of the Filipino soul, and in each one, I found a piece of myself. Marika. The immigrant's first wound. Before I ever left the Philippines, I already knew what homesickness felt like because of Marika. Watching Nora as Milagros, the lonely nurse in America, was like seeing the future of every Filipino who dared to leave home for survival. She wasn't glamorous there. She wasn't the superstar. She was tired. She was hopeful. She was hurting. And I understood something. Leaving home is not just a journey. 22, Chapter 6. It is a wound. When I eventually became an immigrant myself, I carried Milagros with me. Her silence, her longing, her strength, her loneliness. In her eyes, I saw the truth that every immigrant learns. You can chase a better life and still feel incomplete. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. Bakit may kahapon pa. The fire of a wounded child. There was a time in my life when anger felt like the only language I knew. Poverty does that. Injustice does that. The feeling of being unseen does that. And when I watched Nora as Helen in Marta Chapter 6, back at May Kahapon Pa, I saw a girl who carried her pain like a weapon. She wasn't just acting. She was remembering. She was fighting. She was breaking. Helen's rebellion wasn't about violence. It was about grief. The grief of a child who lost everything and had no place to put her sorrow except in the fire she carried inside. I wasn't a rebel like her, but I understood her. I understood what it meant to want justice so badly it becomes a kind of prayer. Her story taught me that anger is not shameful. It is a sign that something inside you still believes you deserve better. 25. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor. Chapter 6. The Flor Contemplacion Story. The Pain We Carry Abroad. There are films that hurt to watch, and the Flor Contemplacion story is one of them. Flor was every Filipino mother who left home to feed her children. Every domestic helper who endured loneliness, fear, and sacrifice. Every worker who carried the weight of a family on her back. When Nora portrayed Flor, she didn't just act, she surrendered. She allowed herself to break so the world could understand the suffering of those who leave home out of love. Watching that film, I realized something painful. Filipinos don't migrate for adventure. We migrate for survival. Flor's story taught me that the world can be cruel to people like us, brown, poor, far from home. But it also taught me that dignity is something no country can take away. 27. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor. 28, Chapter 6. Thy womb. The quiet strength of a woman who loves thy womb was different. It was quiet, almost like a whisper. But in that whisper, Nora carried the weight of a lifetime. As Shaleha, the barren Badjao midwife who helps other women give birth while she cannot, she showed a kind of love that is rarely seen. The love that sacrifices, the love that endures, the love that asks for nothing in return. Her silence in that film was not emptiness. It was devotion. It was surrender. It was strength. Watching her, I understood that love is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quietest thing in the room, and the strongest. 29. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor. What these roles taught me. These 4 films shaped the way I understood the world. Chapter 6. America taught me the loneliness of leaving home. Bakit May Kahapon Pa taught me the fire of injustice. The Flor Contemplacion story taught me the suffering of sacrifice. Thy womb taught me the quiet strength of love. And through all of them, Nora taught me this, that the Filipino heart is both fragile and unbreakable. That we can be wounded and still rise. That we can be poor and still dream. That we can be far from home and still belong to ourselves. These films were not just stories I watched. They were lessons I lived. And in each one I found another reason to keep the photograph we took together. A reminder that the woman who shaped a nation also shaped the boy I used to be. Chapter 7. The Lessons Her Eyes Taught Me. Here are people who teach with words, and there are people who teach with their lives. Nora Aunor taught with her eyes. Long before I understood the craft of acting, I understood the truth in her gaze. It was the first language I learned outside of my own home, a language of pain, resilience, longing, and quiet defiance. Every time she looked into the camera, it felt like she was looking at people like me, People who grew up with empty pockets but full hearts. Her eyes taught me things no school ever did. They taught me how to endure, how to stay soft in a hard world, how to keep going even when no one believed in you, how to rise without stepping on anyone, how to survive without losing yourself. Chapter 7. I didn't know it then, but I was growing up with her as my silent mentor, the eyes that refused to break. When I watched her in Bona, I saw a woman who loved too deeply, who gave too much, who was betrayed by the very person she worshipped, but she didn't break. She bent, she trembled, she suffered, but she didn't break. And I thought maybe I don't have to break either. Growing up poor means you learn disappointment early. You learn heartbreak early. You learn silence early. But watching her taught me that silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is strength. Sometimes silence is survival, the eyes that carried a nation's pain. In the Flora Contemplacion story, her eyes carried the grief of every Filipino mother who left home to feed her children. I didn't have the words for it then, but I felt the weight of her sorrow. It was the sorrow of sacrifice, the kind that doesn't ask for applause, only understanding. Her eyes taught me empathy. They taught me to see the suffering of others even when they hid it well. They taught me that strength is not loud. Sometimes it is the quiet endurance of someone who has no choice but to keep going. 33. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor, the eyes that refused to forget in Bakit May Kahapon Pa. Her eyes burned with the fire of a child who lost everything. That fire stayed with me. It reminded me that anger is not shameful. Anger is a sign that something inside you still believes you deserve better. Her eyes taught me justice. They taught me that pain has a memory. They taught me that the past shapes us, but it does not have to imprison us. The eyes that loved without asking anything back in thy womb. Her eyes held a love so deep it didn't need words. It was the kind of love that sacrifices quietly, that gives without expecting, that endures without complaint. Her eyes taught me love, not the romantic kind, the kind that stays, the kind that forgives, the kind that survives even when the world is unkind, the boy who learned to see. As I grew older, I realized something. I wasn't just watching her films. I was learning how to live. Her eyes became my compass. Whenever I felt lost, I remembered the way she looked at the world, with honesty, with courage, with a softness that refused to die. And maybe that's why I kept our photograph for more than 30 on Chapter 7 years. Because in that picture, I see the boy I used to be, shy, uncertain, hungry for a better life, standing beside the woman who taught him how to see the world differently. She didn't save me, but she showed me how to save myself. This chapter of my life, the years when her eyes became my teacher, shaped the way I faced every battle that came after. With quiet strength, with dignity, with the belief that even someone like me, someone who started with nothing, could rise. Because she did. And in her gaze, I found the courage to believe I could too. 38, Chapter 8. The women who taught me strength. Here are roles an actress plays, and there are roles she becomes. With Nora Aunor, the line between the two disappears. She didn't just portray women, she carried their lives, their wounds, their hopes, their quiet rebellions. And through her, I learned the many shapes of strength. These films were not just stories I watched. They were lessons I lived. Andrea, the woman who refused to be silenced. In Andrea, she played a rebel. Not the kind who shouts, but the kind who stands firm, even when the world tries to break her. Andrea was a woman caught in the crossfire of politics and survival. A woman who wanted nothing more than to live with dignity. 36, Chapter 8. Watching her, I learned that courage is not always loud. Sometimes courage is simply refusing to disappear. Andrea taught me that even when the world tries to silence you, you can still choose to speak with your truth, with your choices, with your life. Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor. Chapter 8. Tatlong Taong Walang Diyos. The woman who loved in a time of war. There are films that feel like wounds that never fully heal. This was one of them. As Rosario, Nora portrayed a woman caught between love and betrayal during the Japanese occupation. She carried shame, grief, and guilt, but also a strength that refused to be erased by history. Rosario taught me that forgiveness is not weakness, it is survival. It is choosing to keep living even when the world has taken everything from you. Her eyes in this film held the sorrow of a nation and the resilience of a woman who refused to be defined by her suffering. 39. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor 40, Chapter 8. Bakit Bughaw ang Langit, The Girl Who Loved Too Deeply. This was one of her quietest films, but also one of her most devastating. As Babette, she loved with a purity that felt almost painful. She loved without expecting anything back. She loved even when it hurt. She loved even when the world told her she wasn't enough. Babette taught me that love is not measured by what you receive. It is measured by what you give, even when it breaks you. Her tenderness in this film reminded me of the softness I tried to hide growing up. She taught me that softness is not a weakness, it is a gift. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor 42, Chapter 8. Tinik sa Dibdib, The Woman Who Carried Everyone's Burden. In Tinik sa Dibdib, Nora played a woman who suffered quietly, a daughter, a wife, a mother, a victim of circumstance. She carried the weight of everyone's expectations until it crushed her. Watching her, I saw the lives of so many Filipino women, overworked, overlooked, and overwhelmed. Women who give everything and receive so little. Women who endure because they have no choice. This film taught me empathy. It taught me to see the invisible burdens people carry. It taught me that kindness is not optional. It is necessary. 43. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor. Chapter 8. Bona, the devotion that destroyed her. If Tatlangtang Walang Diyos was a wound, Bona was a slow-burning heartbreak. Here, she played a young woman who gave everything to a man who gave nothing in return. Her performance was painfully honest, the kind of honesty that exposes the parts of ourselves we try to hide. Her final scene, trembling with rage, grief, and awakening, is one of the most unforgettable moments in Philippine cinema. Bona taught me the danger of loving someone who does not love you back, and the strength it takes to walk away from the ruins. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor, Chapter 8. Bulaklak sa City Jail. The Woman the System Failed, one of her most haunting performances. She played a woman crushed by poverty, betrayed by society, and abandoned by the very systems meant to protect her. Her eyes in this film were unforgettable. Not angry, not defeated, but pleading for a justice that never came. She gave voice to the women no one listened to. She gave dignity to the forgotten. She gave truth to the oppressed. 7. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor Himala. The woman who faced a nation's hunger for miracles. There are performances that feel like storms. Quiet at first, then suddenly overwhelming. Elsa was one of them. She stood in the middle of the desert, a small woman swallowed by a crowd desperate for salvation. They wanted answers, signs. Chapter 8. Wonders. They wanted her to carry their pains so they wouldn't have to face it themselves. But what struck me most was not the spectacle. It was her loneliness. Her truth was simple, painful, and brave. That miracles do not fall from the sky. They come from us. Elsa taught me that standing for the truth will not make you popular. It will not make you safe. But it will make you whole. And sometimes that is the only miracle we get. 49. The Ma Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor in Chapter 8. Minsay Isang Gamu-Gamu. The sister who fought for her land. Some films do not just tell a story. They expose a wound. In this one, she was a woman caught between the dream of leaving and the duty of staying. Her brother's death was not just a tragedy. It was a symbol of a country treated as expendable. Her grief was the grief of every Filipino who had ever been dismissed, ignored, or stepped on by forces larger than themselves. Her anger was righteous. Her sorrow was national. She taught me that identity is not something you inherit. It is something you defend. and that loving your country is not blind patriotism. It is the courage to demand better for your people. 1. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor. 52. Chapter 8. Bye-bye. The woman the world tried to break in Bye-bye. She portrayed a woman stripped of choices, trapped in a life shaped by cruelty and circumstance. There was no glamour in her suffering, no melodrama, only truth. Her silence was heavy. Her eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting for far too long. But even in her darkest moments, she held on to a sliver of dignity. A quiet refusal to surrender her humanity. She taught me that strength is not always loud or visible. Sometimes strength is simply surviving another day in a world determined to crush you. 53. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor, or Chapter 8. Bakit may kahapon pa. The survivor of a history that refused to let go, Helen was not a victim. She was a wound walking through the world, demanding to be seen. Her rage was not madness, it was memory. It was the echo of every injustice that had been buried, denied, or rewritten. She carried the trauma of a nation scarred by violence, and she refused to let the past be forgotten. Her story taught me that healing is not erasure. Healing is remembering with clarity, confronting the truth, and choosing to rise anyway, even when the world tells you to move on. 55. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor. 56. Chapter 8. The Women Who Raised Me Without Knowing It. Andrea taught me courage. Babette taught me tenderness. Rosario taught me forgiveness. The mothers taught me sacrifice. The wounded women taught me empathy. The rebels taught me truth. Bona taught me self-worth. The imprisoned taught me compassion. And through all of them, Nora taught me this. Strength has many faces. Some loud, some quiet. Some broken, some healing, some fighting, some simply surviving. These women, these characters she breathed life into, shaped the way I understood the world. They shaped the way I understood myself. They shaped the way I learned to rise. And maybe that's why I kept our photograph for more than 30 years. Because in that picture, I see the boy I used to be, standing beside the woman who taught him the many forms of strength. 57.9, Chapter 9. The films that grew up with me. Here are movies you watch once, and there are movies that stay with you for a lifetime. Nora Aunor's films grew up with me. They matured as I matured. They deepened as my life deepened. They revealed new truths every time I returned to them, like old friends who knew when to comfort me, when to challenge me, and when to remind me who I was becoming. By the time I reached adulthood, her films were no longer just entertainment. They were emotional maps. They were survival guides. They were mirrors of the life I was trying to build. The film that taught me about leaving. Merica. When I finally left the Philippines, I carried Merica in my heart like a warning and a blessing. Milagros, the lonely nurse in America, taught me that migration is not just a journey. It is a sacrifice. It is a quiet ache that follows you everywhere, even in 58, the Chapter 9, your happiest moments. I didn't know it then, but I was living her story in my own small way. The homesickness, the longing, the feeling of being both grateful and lost. Her loneliness prepared me for my own, the film that taught me about anger. Bakit may kahapon pa. There were moments in my life when anger felt like the only thing keeping me alive. Watching Helen, the wounded child turned rebel, gave me permission to feel that anger without shame. She wasn't angry because she was bad. She was angry because she was hurt. And I understood that. I understood the fire that comes from injustice, from poverty, from being overlooked. Helen taught me that anger is not the enemy. It is the beginning of healing. 59. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor. The film that taught me about sacrifice, The Floor. Contemplation story. As I grew older, I began to understand the weight carried by every Filipino who leaves home to work abroad. Floor's story was not just a tragedy. It was a reflection of millions of lives, mothers, fathers, siblings, who endure loneliness and fear for the sake of the people they love. Watching Nora as Floor, I learned that sacrifice is not always noble. Sometimes it is painful, sometimes it is unfair, sometimes it is the only choice you have. Floor taught me compassion. For others, and for myself, the film that taught me about love. Thy Womb, love changes as you grow older. It becomes quieter, deeper, more complicated. Shaleha, the Bajau midwife who could not bear a child, taught me that love is not possession. Love is not control. Love is not loud. Love is sacrifice. Love is acceptance. Love is letting go. Her silence in that film spoke louder than any dialogue. It taught me that love is strongest when it asks for nothing in return. 60, Chapter 9. The films that became my companions. As I moved through adulthood, through heartbreak, through migration, through the slow building of a life I once thought impossible, her films were always with me. When I felt lost, I watched Marika. When I felt angry, I watched Bakit May Kahapon Pa. When I felt tired, I watched Flor Contemplacion. When I felt unloved, I watched Thy Womb. When I needed strength, I watched Andrea. When I needed tenderness, I watched Bakit Bugaw ang Langit. When I needed forgiveness, I watched Tatlong Taong Walang Diyos. When I needed empathy, I watched Tinik sa Dibdib. When I needed to understand my mother, I watched Babay. As I grew older, her films grew with me. From the innocence of Bakit Bughaw ang Langit, to the moral weight of Tatlong Taong Walang Diyos, to the volcanic emotional truth of Inaka ng Anak Mo, to the raw heartbreak of Bona, to the haunting injustice of Bulaklak sa city jail. Her roles deepened. As my understanding of the world deepened, these films were not just stories. They were companions. They were reminders that I was not alone in my struggles. They were proof that pain can be transformed into art, and art can be transformed into strength. 61, the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor, the boy who grew up with her films. By the time I reached the middle of my life, I realized something. I didn't just grow up watching Nora Aunor. I grew up with her. Her films matured as I matured. Her characters deepened as my understanding deepened. Her stories became the language of my own survival. And maybe that's why I kept our photograph for more than 30 years. Because in that picture, I see the boy I used to be, standing beside the woman whose films raised him, guided him, and taught him how to face the world. This chapter of my life, and the years when, her films became my companions, shaped the adult I became. Someone who endured, someone who loved, someone who forgave, someone who survived. Because she did. And through her films, she taught me how. Chapter 10. Becoming the man she taught me to be, here. Comes a point in life when childhood dreams stop being fantasies and start becoming foundations. I didn't realize it at first, but everything I learned from watching Nora Aunor, her strength, her silence, her resilience, began shaping the way I lived as an adult. I didn't grow up to be a superstar. I didn't grow up to be famous, but I grew up to be someone who survived. And that, in many ways, was because of her, the quiet strength I carried into adulthood. Adulthood is not a single moment. It is a series of small awakenings, some gentle, some painful. There were days when I felt like I was still that boy from a poor family, trying to prove I deserved a place in the world. There were nights when I questioned every choice I made. There were 63, the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor mornings when I woke up tired before the day even began. But every time life felt too heavy, I remembered the women she portrayed. The mother who endured and held her family together, the rebel who fought, the lover who forgave, the immigrant who longed, the midwife who sacrificed, the survivor who refused to break, the truth teller who stood alone, the devotee who loved too heavy, the sister who defended her land, the worker who carried quiet burdens, the survivor who rose from every wound. They became the voices in my head when my own voice was too weak to guide me, the photograph that grew older with me. I kept our photograph through everything, through the moves, the heartbreaks, the victories, the losses. It aged as I aged. Its edges softened as my own edges hardened. The boy in the picture stayed young, but the man holding it changed. Sometimes I would look at that photo and ask myself, what would he think of the man I became? Would he be proud? Would he recognize me? Chapter 10. And then I would look at her, standing beside me, smiling with that quiet warmth. And I would remember that she never judged the people who loved her. She embraced them. She carried them. She understood them. That photograph was not just a memory. It was a promise that I would keep going no matter how hard life became, the lessons I took into the world. As I entered adulthood, I realized that the lessons I learned from her films were not just emotional. They were practical. They were survival tools. From Andrea, Paano ba ang maging isang ina? I learned courage and compassion. From Tatlong Taong Walang Diyos, I learned forgiveness. From Bakit Bughaw ang Langit, I learned tenderness. From Tinik sa Dibdib, I learned empathy. From America, I learned resilience. From Bakit May Kahapon Pa, I learned justice. From Flor Contemplacion, I learned sacrifice. From Thy Womb, I learned love. From Himala, I learned the courage to stand by the truth even when it isolates me. From Bona, I learned the importance of loving without losing myself. From Minsay Isang Gamu Gamu, I learned the strength to defend my identity in a world that tries to diminish it. These were not just movie lessons. They were life lessons. They were the tools I used to build the man I became. 65, the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor, the man who learned to rise quietly. I didn't rise loudly. I didn't rise quickly. I didn't rise in a way that made headlines. I rose the way she did, quietly, steadily, with dignity. I worked hard. I endured. I kept going even when no one was watching. I learned to stand up for myself. I learned to speak when it mattered. I learned to stay silent when silence was strength. I learned to love without fear. I learned to forgive without forgetting. I learned to dream without apology. And through it all, I carried her with me. Not as a celebrity, not as a legend, but as the woman who taught me how to face the world, the boy who dreamed, and the man who lived by. The time I reached this chapter of my life, I understood something I never understood as a child. I didn't want to be Nora Aunor. I wanted to be someone who lived with the same courage she carried in her eyes. And in my own small way, I did. The boy who dreamed of her became the man who survived because of her. The boy who idolized her became the man who honored her. The boy who kept a photograph became the man who kept a promise to rise, to endure, to dream. 6, Chapter 10, because she did. And in her story, I found the strength to write my own. 11, Chapter 11, the battles I faced with her beside me. Life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't wait for you to gather strength. It simply arrives with its storms, its losses, its disappointments, and you either break or you endure. I endured because she taught me how. Not directly, not personally. But through the stories she carried, the characters she embodied, the eyes that spoke truths I didn't yet have the courage to say, by the time I reached the hardest chapters of my life, I realized something. I wasn't facing them alone. I was facing them with the strength I borrowed from her. 68, Chapter 11. The hard years that tested me, there were years when everything felt heavy. Work, responsibility, expectations, loneliness. The quiet ache of wanting a better life but not knowing how to reach it. There were days when I woke up tired before the day even began. Nights when I lay awake wondering if I had failed myself. Moments when I questioned whether the boy in the photograph would be disappointed in the man I became. But every time I felt myself slipping, I returned to her. Not to the fame, not to the glamour, but to the truth she carried in her performances. The truth that life is hard, but people like us are harder. The strength I borrowed from her characters. When I felt lost, I remembered Merica. Milagros, standing alone in a foreign land, longing for home, but fighting for her future. When I felt angry at the unfairness of life, I remembered Bakit May Kahapon Pa, Helen carrying the fire of injustice in her chest, refusing to be silenced. When I felt tired, I remembered Flor Contemplacion, a woman who endured more than any human should, yet held on to dignity till the end. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. When I felt unloved, I remembered thy womb. Shalaha loving, quietly, deeply, without asking for anything in return. When I felt broken, I remembered Tatlong Taong Walang Dios, Rosario surviving shame, grief, and betrayal, yet choosing to keep living. When I felt invisible, I remembered Tinik sa Dibdib, the woman who carried everyone's burdens till she learned to carry her own. These characters were not just roles. They were reminders that pain is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of strength, the photograph, that became my anchor. There were moments when I felt like giving up, when the world felt too big, when my dreams felt too small, when my heart felt too tired. And in those moments, I would take out the photograph we took together, the one I kept safe for more than 30 years. I would look at the boy I used to be, shy, hopeful, trembling with awe, standing beside the woman who taught him how to dream. And I would remind myself, if he believed in her, and if she survived everything she did, then I can survive this too. Chapter 11. That photograph was not just a memory. It was a lifeline, the quiet companion. Through my darkest nights, people often think that inspiration is loud, that it comes with fireworks, applause, grand speeches. But mine came quietly. In the stillness of my room, in the glow of a television screen, in the silence of a photograph aging with me. She was there in the background of my life, not as a superstar, not as a legend, but as a companion through the battles no one else saw. She didn't save me, but she gave me the courage to save myself, the man who learned to stand up again. By the time I reached this chapter in my life, I understood something I never understood as a child. Strength is not the absence of pain. Strength is the decision to rise despite it. And I rose, slowly, quietly, stubbornly, because she showed me how. The boy who dreamed of her became the man who survived because of her. The boy who idolized her became the man who carried her lessons in his bones. The boy who kept a photograph, the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor became the man who kept going. Because she did. And in her story, I found the courage to continue writing my own. 72:12, Chapter 12, the 2 roles that changed my life. To hear are films that entertain you. There are films that move you. And then there are films that change the way you see the world. For me, 2 of Nora Aunor's roles became more than performances. They became turning points. They became mirrors. They became warnings. They became prayers. Himala and Minsay Isang Gamu-Gamu were not just movies I watched. They were movies that watched me, that confronted me, challenged me, and shaped the way I carried my own battles. Himala, the truth that lives in silence. The first time I watched Himala, I didn't fully understand it. I was too young, too innocent, too hopeful. But even then, I felt the weight of Elsa's eyes. The way she carried the desperation of an entire town. The way she became a symbol of hope and of the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor deception at the same time. As I grew older, the film grew with me. I began to understand the hunger of the people around her. The hunger for miracles, the hunger for answers, the hunger for something to believe in when life becomes unbearable. And then came the line that shaped a nation, Walang Himala. There is no miracle. But the truth is, she wasn't saying there is no hope. She was saying the miracle is us, our choices, our courage, our willingness to face the truth even when it hurts. Elsa taught me that truth is not always comforting. Sometimes truth is the wound that forces you to grow. Her silence taught me that not all battles are loud. Her breakdown taught me that even the strongest can fall. Her final moment taught me that the world can be cruel, but we must not become cruel with it. Himala taught me to question, to think, to see beyond what is shown, to find strength not in miracles, but in myself. Chapter 12, Minsay Isang Gamu-Gamu. The cry of a wounded nation. If Himala taught me truth, Minsay Isang Gamu-Gamu taught me anger. Not the destructive kind, the righteous kind, the kind that wakes you up. the kind that refuses to accept injustice. When Nora said, "My brother is not a pig," she wasn't just speaking for her character, she was speaking for every Filipino who had ever been disrespected, dismissed, dehumanized. She was speaking for the poor, for the powerless, for the ones who were always told to stay quiet. That line became a battle cry, a reminder that dignity is not negotiable, that respect is not optional, that Filipinos deserve to be seen as human beings, not as shadows in someone else's country. Watching that film, I felt something ignite inside me. A fire I didn't know I had. A fire that said, I deserve better. My people deserve better. My country deserves better. It was the first time I understood that being Filipino is not just identity, it is responsibility. It is pride. It is pain. It is history carried in our bones. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. Minsay isang gamo-gamo taught me to stand up, to speak up, to never allow anyone to make me feel small, the two films that raised me. Himala taught me truth. Gamo-gamo taught me justice. Together, they shaped the man I became. They taught me to question the world. They taught me to defend myself. They taught me to see the suffering of others. They taught me to rise from my own. These films were not just stories. They were lessons. They were warnings. They were mirrors of the Filipino soul. And through them, Nora Aunor became more than a superstar to me. She became a teacher, a compass, a quiet revolution in my life. The boy who learned to fight and the man who learned to see. By the time I reached this chapter in my life, I understood why these two films stayed with me. Because they taught me the two things I needed most to survive: truth and courage. Truth to face the world as it is. Courage to change the world as chapter 12. It should be. And maybe that's why I kept our photograph for more than 30 years. Because in that picture, I see the boy who needed miracles and the man who learned he didn't need them. He only needed strength. He only needed truth. He only needed courage. And she gave him all three. 7:13. Chapter 13. The conscience I learned from her to hear are lessons you learn from school, lessons you learn from family, and lessons you learn from life. But the lessons that shaped my conscience, the ones that taught me how to stand, how to speak, how to see, came from two films and one woman. Himala taught me truth. Minsay isang gamo-gamo taught me justice. Together they taught me who I wanted to be, the truth that refused to hide. Himala, as I grew older, Himala stopped being a movie and became a mirror. Elsa's journey, from ordinary girl to reluctant saint to tragic symbol, taught me that people will always search for miracles when life becomes unbearable. They will cling to anything that, while in chapter 13, promises hope, even if it hurts them in the end. But the real miracle was never Elsa. It was the courage to face the truth. Her final words echoed in my life long after the credits ended, Walang himala. There is no miracle, not because life is hopeless, but because we are the miracle. We are the ones who must change our lives. We are the ones who must face our fears. We are the ones who must rise from our own darkness. Elsa taught me that truth is not always beautiful. Sometimes truth is painful. Sometimes truth is lonely. Sometimes truth is the only thing that can save you. And in my hardest moments, when I felt lost, when I felt small, when I felt like the world was too heavy, I remembered her eyes. Eyes that carried the weight of a town's desperation. Eyes that saw through lies. Eyes that broke before they surrendered. She taught me to face my own truth, even when it hurt. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. The cry that woke me up, Minsay isang gamo-gamo. If Himala taught me truth, Minsay isang gamo-gamo taught me courage. There is a kind of anger that destroys, and a kind of anger that awakens. The anger I felt watching that film was the second kind. When Nora said, "My brother is not a pig," it wasn't just a line, it was a wound. A scream, a truth that demanded to be heard. It was the first time I understood what it meant to be Filipino, to carry pride and pain in the same breath, to fight for dignity in a world that often denies it, to stand up even when your voice shakes. That line became a compass in my life. Whenever someone tried to belittle me, whenever I felt invisible, whenever I felt the world treating me as less, I remembered her voice. Firm, clear, unapologetic. She taught me that silence is not always noble. Sometimes silence is surrender. Sometimes silence is how injustice survives. And so I learned to speak, not loudly, not aggressively, but truthfully. Chapter 13. Because she did, the conscience I carried into my own life. As I grew into adulthood, I realized something profound. I wasn't just influenced by her films. I was shaped by them. Elsa taught me to question. Corazon taught me to resist. Both taught me to see the world not as it pretends to be, but as it truly is. And because of them, I learned to stand up for myself, to defend others, to recognize injustice, to value truth, to protect my dignity, to never let anyone make me feel small. These were not just movie lessons. They were moral lessons. They were the foundation of the man I became, the photograph, that held my conscience, sometimes when life tested me, when I faced unfairness, when I felt disrespected, when I felt the world pushing me down. I would take out the photograph we took together. The boy in that picture didn't know anything about truth or 81. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor justice yet. He only knew admiration. He only knew awe. He only knew the warmth of standing beside someone he idolized. But the man holding that photograph knew better. He knew that the woman beside him had shaped his conscience. He knew that her films had taught him how to live. He knew that her voice had become his inner voice. And he knew that he survived because she taught him how, the man I became because of her. By the time I reached this chapter of my life, I understood something clearly. I didn't just grow up watching Nora Aunor. I grew up because of her. She taught me truth. She taught me justice. She taught me courage. She taught me dignity. She taught me to rise. And in the quiet moments of my life, the moments no one else saw, I carried her lessons like armor. The boy who dreamed of her became the man who lived by the values she embodied. The boy who idolized her became the man who honored her. The boy who kept a photograph became the man who kept a conscience, because she did. And in her story, I found the strength to write 82, chapter 13, my own. Chapter 14, how her truth became my own. Here are moments in life when you realize that the things that shaped you were not accidents. They were foundations. They were guideposts. They were quiet teachers preparing you for battles you didn't yet know you would face. For me, the teachings didn't come from classrooms or mentors. They came from 2 films and 1 woman whose voice echoed through my life long after the credits faded. Himala taught me to face truth. Minsay isang gamu-gamu taught me to demand dignity. Together they became the backbone of the man I eventually became. Chapter 14, the truth I carried into every decision, Himala. As I entered adulthood, I realized how many people live their lives waiting for miracles, waiting for someone to save them, waiting for life to change on its own, waiting for answers that never come. But Elsa taught me something different. She taught me that truth is the only miracle we can rely on, that we must face our lives honestly, our wounds, our fears, our failures, our desires. There were moments when I wanted to run from my own truth, moments when I felt ashamed of my past, moments when I doubted my worth, moments when I questioned whether I deserved anything better. But then I would remember her voice. Walang himala. There is no miracle. Not because life is hopeless, but because we must become the miracle. And so I learned to take responsibility for my choices. I learned to stop waiting for life to change. I learned to change myself. Elsa's truth became my truth. Her courage became my courage. Her fall became my awakening. Boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. The dignity I defended. Minsay isang gamu-gamu. There were times in my life when I felt small, invisible, dismissed, looked down upon, treated as less. It happens to many of us, especially when we come from poverty, especially when we migrate, especially when we carry brown skin in places that worship whiteness. But Corazon's cry, "My brother is not a pig," became my shield. It reminded me that I deserved respect, that my people deserved respect, that my story mattered, that my dignity was not negotiable. There were moments when I wanted to stay silent, to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, to protect myself. But silence is not always noble. Sometimes silence is surrender. And so I learned to speak up, not loudly, not aggressively, but firmly. I learned to say, I deserve better. I deserve fairness. I deserve to be seen. Corazon's courage became my courage. Her anger became my awakening. Her dignity became my armor. Chapter 14. The way her films guided my real life as I moved through adulthood, through work, through relationships, through migration, through heartbreak, through rebuilding. I realized that her films were not just memories, they were tools. When I needed clarity, I remembered Himala. When I needed courage, I remembered Gamu Gamu. When I needed strength, I remembered Flor Contemplacion. When I needed tenderness, I remembered Bakit Bughaw ang Langit. When I needed forgiveness, I remembered Tatlong Taong Walang Diyos. When I needed empathy, I remembered Tinik sa Dibdib. When I needed resilience, I remembered Merica. When I needed love, I remembered Thy Womb. Films like Andrea, Tinik sa Dibdib, Inaka ng Anak Mo. And Bona taught me that courage is not always loud. Sometimes courage is the quiet insistence on truth, the refusal to surrender your dignity, the strength to walk away from those who break you. Her films became my emotional vocabulary. Her characters became my inner counsel. Her truth became my compass. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. The photograph that became a reminder of who I was becoming. There were nights when I felt lost, when life felt too heavy, when the world felt too loud, when my heart felt too tired. And in those nights, I would take out the photograph we took together, the one I kept safe for more than 30 years. I would look at the boy I used to be, the boy who didn't know truth yet, the boy who didn't know dignity yet, the boy who didn't know courage yet. And then I would look at her, standing beside him, smiling softly, as if she already knew the man he would become. That photograph became a reminder that I was not alone, that I had a guide, that I had a compass, that I had a truth to live by, the man who learned to live with courage and truth. By the time I reached this chapter of my life, I understood something clearly. I didn't just admire Nora Aunor. I learned from her. I grew because of her. I survived because of her. Her truth became my truth. Her courage became my courage. Her dignity became my dignity. The boy who dreamed of her became the man who lived by the 88 chapter 14. Values she embodied. The boy who kept a photograph became the man who kept a conscience. The boy who idolized her became the man who honored her. Not with fame, not with applause, but with the life he built. Because she did. And in her story, I found the strength to write my own. 15, chapter 15. When her lessons became my own. Here comes a moment in every life when the things that shaped you stop being influences and start becoming instincts. For years, I leaned on Nora Aunor's films like crutches, her truth, her courage, her silence, her fire. They held me up when I couldn't stand on my own. But adulthood has a way of forcing you to grow into yourself. And somewhere along the way, without noticing, I stopped asking, what would she do? And started asking, what do I believe? That was the moment her lessons became mine, leaving home with only what I could carry. When I left the Philippines, I didn't bring much. A few clothes, few memories, a few dreams I wasn't sure I could afford, and the photograph. And in chapter 15, the same photograph I had protected for decades, creased, yellowing, soft at the edges, but still holding the boy I used to be. I didn't know what kind of life waited for me abroad. I didn't know if I would belong. I didn't know if I would survive. But I carried something stronger than fear, the truth I learned from Himala, and the dignity I learned from Minsay, Isang Gamu-Gamu. Those two films became my passport, not to another country, but to another version of myself. Learning to stand without borrowed strength, life abroad is a strange kind of loneliness. You're surrounded by people, but you feel like a ghost. You speak, but your voice sounds different in a foreign place. You work, but you wonder if anyone sees you. In those early years, I leaned on her films the way a child leans on a nightlight. But slowly, something shifted. I began to speak up for myself. Not because Corazon taught me to, but because I believed I deserved respect. I began to face my fears, not because Elsa showed me truth, but because I wanted to live honestly. I began to endure hardship, not because her characters, when the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor survived, but because I knew I could. Her lessons were no longer borrowed. They were mine. The first time I realized I had changed. It happened quietly, not in a dramatic moment, not in a crisis, but in an ordinary day. Someone spoke to me in a way that once would have made me shrink. The old me, the boy from poverty, the boy who stayed small, would have stayed silent. But the man I had become looked them in the eye and said calmly, firmly, no. No anger, no fear, no apology. Just truth, just dignity. And afterward I realized something. I didn't think of Nora in that moment. I didn't need to. The strength I used was my own, the photograph. That became a symbol, not a crutch. As the years passed, I still kept the photograph. But it changed meaning. It was no longer the proof that I once met her. It was no longer chapter 15. The reminder of the boy who needed her. It was no longer the anchor I clung to in my darkest nights. It became something else, a symbol of who I had become. A man who survived, a man who rose, a man who carried truth and dignity not because he borrowed them, but because he built them inside himself. The boy in the photograph needed her. The man holding it had learned to stand on his own, becoming the person I once looked for. By the time I reached this chapter of my life, I understood something I never expected. I had become the person I once needed, the person I once searched for in her films, the person I once hoped I could be. Not a superstar, not a legend, not a miracle, just someone who survived with dignity, someone who lived with truth, someone who carried courage quietly the way she did. Her lessons shaped me, but my life completed the work. The boy who idolized her became the man who no longer needed to, not because she mattered less, but because I finally mattered to myself. 93 and 16, chapter 16, The Life I Built Far. From home T here is a moment in every immigrant's life when you realize you are no longer visiting, you are living, you are building, you are becoming someone new. For years I carried the Philippines inside me like a wound and a blessing. I carried the lessons I learned from Himala and Minsay Isang Gamu-Gamu like armor. But nothing prepared me for the quiet transformation that happens when you start building a life in a place that doesn't know your history. Abroad, no one knew the boy I used to be. No one knew the poverty I came from. No one knew the photograph I kept hidden in my wallet. No one knew the woman who shaped my courage. All they saw was the man standing in front of them. And for the first time, I had to decide who that man was. For Chapter 16. Learning to belong without losing myself. Belonging is not automatic. It is earned slowly through small acts of courage. The first time I spoke up at work. The first time I said no without apologizing. The first time I allowed myself to take up space. The first time I realized I didn't have to shrink to make others comfortable. These were not dramatic moments. They were quiet victories, the kind that change you from the inside out. I learned to belong not by becoming someone else, but by becoming more of myself. The dignity I learned from Gamu-Gamu became the way I carried myself. The truth I learned from Himala became the way I made decisions. The empathy I learned from her other films became the way I treated people. From Bulaklak's a city jail, I learned that justice is not always given. Sometimes it is simply survived. From Bona, I learned the danger of loving someone who does not love you back. From ina ka ng anak mo, I learned that truth, no matter how painful, must be spoken. Her films were not entertainment, they were lessons in survival. I was no longer living in reaction to my past. I was living in creation of my future. 5. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor, the relationships that taught me new kinds of strength, life abroad, introduced me to people who didn't know my story. People who saw me not as the boy from poverty, not as the fan who carried a photograph, but as a person with value, with presence, with something to offer. Some relationships were brief, some were painful, some were healing. Some taught me how to love. Some taught me how to let go. But each one revealed a part of myself I didn't know existed. I learned that I could be gentle without being weak. I learned that I could be firm without being cruel. I learned that I could be vulnerable without falling apart. I learned that I could be loved without earning it through suffering. These were lessons no film could teach me. These were lessons life demanded I learn on my own. The work that became my grounding work abroad is not just work. It is identity. It is survival. It is proof that you belong. I learned to show up even when I was tired. I learned to speak even when my voice shook. I learned to advocate for myself and for others. I learned to be the person people could rely on. And slowly, without realizing it, I became someone steady. 6. Chapter 16. Someone dependable. Someone respected. Not because I was loud, not because I was brilliant, but because I carried myself with the quiet dignity I learned from her. The world didn't hand me a place. I carved one, the photograph. That became a reminder, not a lifeline. There came a day, I remember it clearly, when I opened my wallet and saw the photograph again. But this time, something felt different. I didn't feel the old ache of longing. I didn't feel the old fear of losing myself. I didn't feel the old need to borrow strength. I felt gratitude. I felt warmth. I felt a gentle pride. The boy in the picture needed her. The man holding it had grown into someone she would recognize, someone she would understand, someone she would respect. The photograph was no longer a lifeline. It was a reminder of where I began, not a definition of who I was. Becoming the man I was meant to be, by the time I reached this chapter of my life, I understood something profound. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. I had not left the Philippines behind. I had carried it with me, in my values, in my resilience, in my quiet strength. And I had not left Nora behind either. Her influence lived in the way I spoke, the way I stood, the way I treated people, the way I faced the world. But I was no longer shaped by her. I was shaped through her. Her lessons were the foundation. My life was the building. The boy who idolized her became the man who honored her, not by worship, but by living with truth, with dignity, with courage, because she did. And now finally, so did I. Chapter 17, the day I finally saw myself clearly. Here are turning points in life that don't arrive with fireworks. They arrive quietly, in a moment so ordinary you almost miss it. But afterward, nothing is the same. For years, I lived with the feeling that I was still catching up to myself, still trying to become someone worthy, still trying to outrun the shadows of poverty, still trying to prove that I deserved the life I was building abroad. But then came the day when everything shifted. Not because of a crisis, not because of a loss, not because of a miracle. It shifted because, for the first time, I saw myself clearly. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. The unexpected moment of recognition. It happened on a morning like any other. I was getting ready for work. The same routine, the same motions, the same quiet house. I opened my wallet to take out my transit card, and the photograph slipped out. The same photograph I'd carried for more than 30 years. The same photograph that survived moves, storms, heartbreaks, and reinventions. The same photograph that once felt like my anchor. I picked it up, expecting the familiar ache, the nostalgia, the longing, the reminder of who I used to be. But instead, something else happened. I looked at the boy in the picture, and for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel protective of him. I didn't feel the old sadness. I felt pride. Not for the boy, but for the man holding the photograph. 100. Chapter 17. The man I had become without realizing it. I saw someone who had survived more than he ever admitted. Someone who had built a life far from home. Someone who had learned to speak with dignity. Someone who had learned to stand with truth. Someone who had learned to love without fear. Someone who had learned to forgive himself. I saw someone who no longer needed to borrow strength from Himala or courage from Minsay Isang Gamugamo. I saw someone who carried those qualities naturally, not as lessons, but as instincts. I saw someone the boy in the photograph would look up to, and that realization broke something open inside me. Not pain, but release, the healing I didn't know I needed. For years, I thought healing meant forgetting, letting go, moving on. But healing is not erasure. Healing is recognition. It is the moment you look at your past and no longer feel trapped by it. It is the moment you look at your younger self and no longer feel ashamed of him. 101, the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. It is the moment you look at your present self and finally say, I made it. I became someone. I am enough. That morning, holding that old photograph, I realized I had healed in ways I never noticed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, the way real healing happens. The influence that became a foundation, not a crutch. Nora Aunor's film shaped me. That will always be true. But by this chapter of my life, her influence had become something different. Not a guide I depended on, not a voice I needed to borrow, not a shield I hid behind. Her influence had become a foundation, the ground I stood on, not the map I followed. I no longer asked, what would Elsa do, or what would Corazon say? I asked, what do I believe? Who am I now? And for the first time, I had answers of my own. Chapter 17. The boy in the photograph and the man who finally met him. As I slipped the photograph back into my wallet, I felt something I had never felt before. A sense of arrival, not to a place, but to myself. The boy in the picture had spent his whole life searching for strength, for dignity, for belonging, for a voice. The man holding the picture had all of those things now. And in that quiet morning light, I realized something simple and profound. I had finally become the person he needed. Chapter 18. Loving a star who was human after all. Most of my life, I carried Nora Aunor like a compass, a guide, a mirror, a source of strength. But loving someone for decades means eventually seeing them clearly. Not as a legend, not as a symbol, but as a human being. And the truth is, she was never perfect. She stumbled, she made mistakes, she hurt people she loved, she faced consequences she didn't always deserve, and some she did. And strangely, it was in her imperfections that I learned the most, the woman behind the roles. Growing up, I only saw the characters, the saints, the rebels, the mothers, the martyrs, but adulthood taught me to see the woman behind them, a woman who struggled with relationships, a woman who had conflicts with her children, a woman who trusted the wrong people, a woman who made choices that disappointed even her. Chapter 18. Most loyal fans, a woman who carried wounds she never fully healed. She was not the miracle people wanted her to be. She was human, brilliant, flawed, fragile, fierce. And that made me love her more, not less. The mistakes I followed without realizing. When you idolize someone, you don't just follow their strengths, you sometimes follow their weaknesses too. I learned silence from her roles, but I also learned avoidance. I learned courage from her characters, but I also learned stubbornness. I learned dignity from her films, but I also learned to hide my pain the way she hid hers. There were moments in my life when I repeated her patterns, trusting the wrong people, staying in relationships longer than I should, carrying burdens alone, believing suffering was a form of loyalty. Her mistakes became warnings I didn't recognize until later, but they shaped me just as deeply as her triumphs. The pain of watching her star. Dim, there is a special kind of heartbreak reserved for fans who stay. You watch the rise, the glory, the brilliance, and then you watch the slow fading. I saw her star dim in real time. Movies that didn't sell. Films pulled from cinemas after a few days. Projects ignored by the public despite their quality. Younger stars taking the spotlight. People forgetting the woman who once carried Philippine cinema on her shoulders. 105, the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. It hurt. Not because she owed us success, but because the world can be cruel to aging women, especially brown women, especially women who built their careers on truth instead of glamour. Watching her fade taught me something I never learned from her peak. Fame is temporary. Art is not. And dignity is forever. The courage to love. Someone fully loving Nora meant loving all of her. The brilliance, the failures, the contradictions, the wounds, the stubbornness, the genius, the humanity. It meant accepting that she was not a miracle. She was a woman who fought, who fell, who rose, who broke, who healed, who tried. And in her imperfections, I found permission to accept my own. I didn't need to be flawless. I didn't need to be unbreakable. I didn't need to be extraordinary. I only needed to be human, honest, growing, learning, trying. Just like her. 6. Chapter 18. The man who learned from her humanity, not her stardom. By the time I reached this chapter of my life, I understood something I never understood as a child. Her greatness was not in her perfection. Her greatness was in her humanity. She made mistakes. She paid for them. She rose again. She kept working. She kept creating. She kept living. And that taught me more than any award she ever won. The boy who idolized her learned strength from her roles. The man who understood her learned wisdom from her flaws. And in the end, it was her humanity, not her stardom, that shaped me the most. Chapter 19. What her imperfections taught me about myself. Owning a star is easy when she is shining. Anyone can admire brilliance. Anyone can worship success. Anyone can love a legend when the world is applauding. But loving someone when the lights dim, that is different. That is loyalty. That is truth. That is love without illusion. And that is the kind of love I had for Nora Aunor. Not blind love, not childish idolization, but the kind of love that sees the whole person, the triumphs, the failures, the contradictions, the wounds, and stays. Because in her imperfections, I found the courage to face my own. 108, Chapter 19. Watching her fall taught me how to rise. There were years when her star dimmed so painfully it felt personal. Movies pulled from cinemas after only a few days. Projects ignored despite their quality. Younger stars replacing her in the public's affection. People mocking her voice, her choices, her relationships. Tabloids feeding on her mistakes like vultures. It hurt. Not because she owed us perfection, but because she deserved better. But here's the truth I learned. Watching her fall taught me how to rise. She didn't hide. She didn't disappear. She didn't pretend. She kept working. She kept creating. She kept showing up even when the world turned its back. And that taught me something I never learned from her glory years. Strength is not proven in success. Strength is proven in survival. 109. The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. Her conflicts made her human and made me honest. Her conflicts with her children, her complicated relationships, her stubbornness, her impulsive decisions. These were not the traits of a saint. They were the traits of a human being. And seeing her humanity forced me to confront my own mistakes, my own stubbornness, my own failures in love, my own conflicts with family, my own tendency to run from pain instead of facing it. She was not a perfect mother. I was not a perfect son. She was not a perfect partner. I was not a perfect partner either. Her flaws didn't disappoint me. They freed me. They reminded me that I didn't need to be flawless to be worthy. I didn't need to be extraordinary to be loved. I didn't need to be unbreakable to survive. 110, Chapter 19. The pain of seeing her hurt and what it revealed about me. There is a special kind of ache in watching someone you admire struggle. When she lost her voice, when she lost roles, when she lost people she loved, when she lost the spotlight that once followed her everywhere. It felt like watching a part of my childhood fade, but that pain revealed something important. I wasn't just mourning her decline. I was mourning the version of myself that believed heroes never fall. Her struggles forced me to grow up, to accept that life is not a straight line, to accept that even the brightest stars dim, to accept that survival is not glamorous, but it is noble. Her downfall taught me compassion for her and for myself. When she made mistakes, I didn't turn away. I didn't judge her. I didn't pretend she was someone else. I understood her because I had made mistakes too, because I had hurt people too, because I had been lost too, because I had been misunderstood. Even the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor too. Her humanity taught me compassion, not just for her, but for myself. I learned to forgive myself the way I forgave her. I learned to accept my flaws the way I accepted hers. I learned to love myself the way I loved her, fully, honestly, without conditions, the star that dimmed and the light that stayed. Her star dimmed. That is true, but her light never disappeared. It lived in her work, it lived in her eyes, it lived in the truth she carried, even when the world stopped looking. It lived in the people she inspired, people like me. And I realized something profound. Her light didn't fade. It moved to the hearts of the people she touched, into mine, the man I became because I loved someone human. By the time I reached this chapter of my life, I understood something clearly. 112. Chapter 19, I didn't grow because she was perfect. I grew because she wasn't. Her brilliance taught me to dream. Her flaws taught me to forgive. Her downfall taught me to endure. Her resilience taught me to rise. The boy who idolized her learned strength from her roles. The man who understood her learned wisdom from her humanity. And in the end, it was her imperfections, not her perfection, that shaped me the most. 113:20, Chapter 20. The last film and the quiet goodbye. The last Nora Aunor film I saw was Mananambal. It wasn't a blockbuster. It wasn't a grand comeback. It wasn't the kind of film that trends or dominates headlines. It was small, quiet, almost hidden. And maybe that was why it hit me so deeply. Because by the time I watched Mananambal, I was no longer the boy who worshipped her. I was no longer the young man who borrowed strength from her roles. I was no longer the adult who needed her films to survive. I was someone who had lived enough life to understand what it means for a star to dim and still shine. 114, Chapter 20, seeing her in a different light. In Mananambal, she was no longer the superstar of my childhood. She wasn't the fierce Elsa of Himala. She wasn't the fiery Corazon of Gamu Gamu. She wasn't the young woman whose eyes carried the weight of a nation. She was older, softer, quieter, more fragile, more human. And for the first time, I didn't look for the legend. I looked for the woman who had lived, the woman who had suffered, the woman who had loved, the woman who had made mistakes, the woman who had risen and fallen and risen again, the woman who had given everything to her art. Even when the world stopped paying attention, the pain of watching a star fade. There's a special ache in seeing your hero age. Not because aging is tragic, but because it reminds you that time spares no one, not even the people who shaped your life. Watching Mananambal, I felt that ache. Her voice was not the same, her movements were slower. Her eyes carried a different kind of weight. Not the fire of youth, but the heaviness of someone who has lived through storms. 115, the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. And yet, there was still something unmistakable in her presence. A quiet dignity, a depth that no fame could erase, a truth that no decline could dim. Her star was not bright the way it once was, but it was steady. And it was real, the film that felt like a mirror. Mananambal was not just the last film I saw. It was a mirror, not of her, but of me. Because by then I had lived enough to understand that life is not a straight rise, that brilliance fades, that mistakes follow us, that relationships break, that children grow distant, that careers slow down, that dreams change shape. that survival is its own kind of success. I saw her humanity, and in it I saw my own. The boy who idolized her would not have understood this film, but the man I had become did. 116, Chapter 20. The quiet goodbye I didn't know I was making. When the credits rolled, I didn't feel the excitement I used to feel after her films. I didn't feel the fire of Gamu Gamu or the shock of Himala or the ache of Flor Contemplacion. I felt something gentler, something sadder, something peaceful. It felt like a goodbye. Not to her, but to the version of myself who needed her so desperately. I realized that I had grown, I had healed, I had become someone who could stand on his own. And that was the quiet gift of Mananambal. It allowed me to love her without needing her. It allowed me to honor her without worshiping her. It allowed me to let go without losing her, the woman who shaped me and the man I became. By the time I watched Mananambal, I understood something I had never understood before. I didn't love Nora Aunor because she was perfect. I loved her because she was human. Her brilliance shaped my dreams. Her flaws shaped my compass scion. Her downfall shaped my resilience. Her survival shaped Kwan, the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor, my courage. Her aging shaped my acceptance. Her last film shaped my closure. The boy who idolized her needed her to be a star. The man I became loved her as a woman. And in that love, honest, imperfect, enduring, I finally understood what she had given me. Not miracles, not answers, not perfection, but truth. And truth, I learned, is the only thing that never fades. Chapter 21. The day my national artist said goodbye. Here are losses you prepare for, and there are losses that break you open without warning. When I saw the news that Nora Aunor had passed away, it felt like the world shifted. Quietly, suddenly, cruelly. I wasn't ready. How could I be? She had been part of my life for so long that I thought foolishly she would always be there, somewhere, creating, surviving, enduring, breathing. But that morning, the world felt different, smaller, quieter, dimmer. My national artist had bid farewell. And something inside me broke. 119, the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor, the grief that arrived like a wave, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of grief that knocks you to your knees. It was a slow, heavy wave, the kind that rises quietly and then suddenly pulls you under. I sat there staring at the headline, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to understand how someone who shaped my entire emotional life could simply be gone. I didn't cry right away. The tears came later. In the silence, in the stillness, in the space where her voice used to live. Remembering the woman, not the legend. As the news spread, people talked about the superstar, the national artist, the icon, the legend. But I didn't think of the legend. I thought of the woman who played Elsa, who taught me truth. The woman who played Corazon, who taught me dignity. The woman who played Flor, who taught me sacrifice. The woman who played Shaleha, who taught me love. The woman who played Andrea, who taught me courage. I thought of her mistakes, her wounds, her stubbornness, her 120, chapter 21, humanity. I thought of the woman who lived a life so full, so complicated, so painful, so brilliant, that no award could ever capture it. I thought of the woman who shaped me without ever knowing my name, the last film, and the final goodbye. When I watched Mananambal, I didn't know it would be the last time I would see her on screen. But now, looking back, it feels like she was already saying goodbye. Her eyes in that film carried something different. Not the fire of youth, not the defiance of her prime, but a quiet acceptance, a softness, a surrender, a peace. It was as if she had given everything she had to give, every truth, every wound, every miracle, every failure, every piece of her soul. And Mananambal was her final offering. A whisper instead of a shout, a candle instead of a spotlight, a blessing instead of a performance. 21, the boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor. The grief that became gratitude. As the days passed, the grief softened. It didn't disappear. Grief never disappears, but it changed shape. It became gratitude. Gratitude for the films that raised me. Gratitude for the lessons that shaped me. Gratitude for the strength I borrowed when I had none. Gratitude for the truth she carried in her eyes. Gratitude for the humanity she never hid. Gratitude for the boy she helped survive. Gratitude for the man she helped become. She was gone, but she was not lost. Not to me, still lives in my heart. People say that when a star dies, its light continues to travel through the universe long after the star itself has faded. That is how she lives in me. Not as a celebrity, not as a national artist, not as a legend, but as a presence, a memory, a compass, a truth. She lives in the way I speak. She lives in the way I stand. She went to chapter 21. Lives in the way I face the world. She lives in the way I love, the way I forgive, the way I endure. She lives in every chapter of my life, from the boy who idolized her to the man who carries her legacy quietly, deeply, faithfully. My national artist has said goodbye, but she has never left. She still lives in my heart, and she always will. Chapter 22. Life goes on, and so does she. When Nora Aunor passed away, something in me broke, but something in me also awakened. Because grief, when it is deep and honest, eventually ally reveals a truth. Life goes on, and so does love. The world didn't stop. The sun still rose. People still went to work, cooked meals, paid bills, lived their ordinary days. But something had shifted. A quiet emptiness, a soft ache, a space where her voice used to echo. And yet, even in that emptiness, I felt her presence more clearly than ever. She was gone. But she was not finished. Way 4, Chapter 22. The superstar lives on through her fans. What surprised me most after her passing was not the grief, it was the love. Fans from every generation, from every province, from every corner of the world began sharing stories, memories, photographs, old posters, rare interviews, scenes from films that shaped their lives. It was as if the entire nation exhaled at once. A collective remembering. People didn't talk about her scandals. They didn't talk about her mistakes. They didn't talk about the dimming of her star. They talked about her eyes, her voice, her truth, her courage, her humanity. They talked about how she made them feel seen, how she made them feel understood, how she made them feel Filipino. And in that outpouring of love, I realized something. She never really left. She simply moved into the hearts of the people she touched. 125, The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor. The unreleased films, proof that her story isn't over. Even after her passing, there are still films of hers waiting to be seen. Contrabida, Liga League, Laro. 3 final offerings, 3 final pieces of her soul, 3 final reminders that her artistry didn't end with her life. There's something poetic about that. The idea that even after death, she still has stories to tell. It feels like she left these films behind as gifts, as if she knew her fans would need one last embrace, one last truth, one last miracle. These films are not just movies. They are echoes. They are footprints. They are proof that her voice continues to travel through time. And when they are finally shown, it will feel like she has returned, not in body, but in spirit. Life moves forward, but she walks with me. As the months passed, the sharpness of grief softened into something gentler, a quiet companionship. 126. Chapter 22. I no longer cried when I saw her photograph. I no longer felt the heaviness in my chest. I no longer felt the shock of loss. Instead, I felt gratitude, warmth, a sense of presence. She walks with me now, not as the superstar, not as the national artist, but as the woman who shaped my courage, my truth, my dignity, my compassion. She lives in the way I speak. She lives in the way I stand. She lives in the way I face the world. She lives in the way I love and forgive and endure. She lives in the boy I used to be and the man I became. The legacy that cannot die. Some stars fade. Some stars burn out. Some stars disappear. But some stars, the rare ones, become constellations. They guide people long after they're gone. They shine in the memories of those who love them. They become part of the sky itself. Nora Aunor is one of those stars. Her films will continue to be studied. Her performances will continue to be watched. Her voice will continue to echo. Her truth will continue to inspire. Her humanity will continue to heal. 127. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor. And her unreleased films, Contrabida, Liga League, Laro, will be her final constellations, her last lights in the sky. She lives in my heart, and always will. Life goes on. That is the nature of life. But love goes on too. That is the nature of the heart. And so even though she has said her final goodbye, she still lives in me, in my memories, in my values, in my courage, in my truth, in my story. My national artist has left the world, but she has not left me. She still lives in my heart, and she always will. Through chapter 23, the world without her and the life that continues. After the grief settled, after the shock, the tears, the silence, life began to move again. Not because I wanted it to, not because I was ready, but because life has its own rhythm, its own stubborn insistence to continue. And slowly, I realized something comforting. Even in a world without her, she was still everywhere. In the voices of her fans, in the memories we shared, in the films she left behind, in the stories still waiting to be told. Work that keeps her spirit alive. Life went on, and so did she. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor, the fans who became her living archive. What surprised me most after her passing was not the grief. It was the community. People who had never met each other suddenly spoke like old friends. Strangers shared memories like family. Generations connected through a single name. Her fans became her living archive, the keepers of her truth, the guardians of her legacy, the storytellers who refused to let her fade. They shared rare photos, old interviews, behind-the-scenes stories, personal encounters, and the kind of love that only grows stronger with time. It felt like she had built a nation, not of citizens, but of hearts. And I was one of them, the unshown films. Proof that her voice still echoes, even after she left this world. There were still films waiting for us. Contrabida, Ligalig, Laro. 3 final stories, 3 final truths, 3 final pieces of her 130, chapter 23. Oh, there is something beautiful about that. The idea that she left behind work we have yet to see, as if she knew her fans would need one last embrace. These films are not just movies. They are messages. They are reminders. They are echoes of a voice that refuses to disappear. And when they are finally shown, it will feel like she has returned, not in body, but in spirit, learning to carry her without grief. There came a moment, quiet, unexpected, when I realized I could think of her without pain. Not because I had forgotten, not because I had moved on, but because grief had transformed into something gentler. I no longer mourned her absence. I celebrated her presence. She lived in the way I faced the world. She lived in the way I spoke with dignity. She lived in the way I stood up for myself. She lived in the way I loved, the way I forgave, the way I endured. She lived in the boy I used to be and the man I had become. She lived in every chapter of my life, not as a star, but as a truth. 31. The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor, the life I continue to build. Life goes on, and I go on with it. I wake up, I work, I love, I grow, I heal, I dream, and in all of it she is there not as a shadow, not as a ghost, but as a quiet companion. Her films taught me how to feel. Her flaws taught me how to forgive. Her downfall taught me how to endure. Her passing taught me how to let go. Her legacy taught me how to live. I am not the boy who idolized her anymore. I am not the young man who needed her strength. I am not the grieving fan who broke when she died. I am someone who carries her.
that
not
connected
as an
him
idol,
to Nora Aunor,
but as part of
the
my own
Philippines' most
story
iconic
she
and
lives
human
on.
national artist.
In
Through her
me,
films, The
in
Raw
us,
Devotion of Bona,
in what she
the
left behind.
volcanic
Some people
honesty
die,
of
some people
Ina
fade,
Ka
some people
ng
are
Anak
forgotten.
Mo, the
But
haunting
some
injustice
people,
of
the rare
Bulaklak
ones,
sa city jail,
become part of the world
the moral
itself.
weight of Tatlong
Nora
Taong
Aunor
Walang
is one of
Diyos,
them.
the
She lives in her
quiet ache
fans.
of
She lives in her
Bakubuhang Langit,
films.
and the
She lives in the
spiritual
stories we
devastation of
tell.
Himala. He found
She lives in the
courage
courage she
compassion,
inspired.
and a
She
mirror
lives in
to his own
132 of chapter
struggles.
23.
Raised in hardship,
The truth she
shaped
carried.
by migration,
She lives in the
and
love she
strengthened by
left behind.
survival. Nelson writes
She
with a
lives in
voice that
me,
is both tender
and she always
and
will.
unflinching.
Through
He explores
24,
how a
chapter
child
24.
from the slums
The
carried
future I
light of a
carry and the
superstar into
legacy
adulthood,
she left behind
how an
after
immigrant learned
the
to
grief
rebuild himself
softened
in
and
a
the
foreign
world
land,
settled
and
into
how
its new
grief
shape.
transformed into
I
gratitude
found myself
after
thinking
the
not
passing
just
of the
about
woman
her
who
life,
unknowingly raised
but
her.
about mine.
This memoir is
For
not
so
a
long, Nora
biography of
Aunor was
Nora
the compass
Aunor.
I followed,
It is a testament
the
to
voice
the
I listened
power
to,
of
the
connection,
truth I
the kind that
borrowed,
forms
the
across
courage I learned.
screens, across
But now,
oceans,
in this chapter
across
of my
lives.
life,
It is a
I began to
story
ask a
about
different
the people
question.
who shape us
What do I
even
do
from
with everything
afar.
she left in
The
me?
artists who give
Because
us
her
language
story
for our
didn't
pain,
end with her
and the
passing.
unexpected ways
It
love
continued,
can enter a
quietly,
life and stay
steadily,
there.
in the
Told
lives of
with
the people she
humility,
touched.
emotional clarity,
And I was one
and
of
the
them,
quiet
the
dignity of
legacy
someone
that
who has
lives
lived
through
through
us.
storms. The
A
boy
legacy
who
is not
dreamed
a
of Nora
statue.
Aunor
It is
is
not
a
an award.
celebration of
It is not a
resilience,
title.
memory,
A
and
legacy
the
is a
enduring
ripple,
power of art
a
to
movement that
save us.
continues
It is
long
for the
after
fans
the source
who
is
saw
gone.
themselves in her
130,
eyes,
chapter
for the dreamers
24.
who held on to hope,
Nora's
and for
legacy
anyone
lives in her
who has ever been
fans,
changed
in the way we
by a
speak about
story,
her,
a
in the way we
performance,
defend
or
her
a single
truth,
unforgettable voice.
in the way we
A
carry
memoir
her
of
humanity.
devotion, survival,
It lives in the
and
films
light
she left
that never
behind,
left him.
the
The boy who
classics, the
dreamed of
forgotten
Nora
ones,
Aunor.
and the unreleased
Yoso,
final works.
some dreams save us.
These films
long
waiting like
before we
sealed
understand why.
letters,
For a young boy
messages from
growing
a
up in
woman who
poverty
still
in
had
the
something to
Philippines,
say.
that salvation came
Her
in the
story
form
isn't
of a woman
finished.
he never met, a woman
And neither
whose
is mine,
voice,
the life I continue to
eyes,
build without her.
and truth
But
reached
because
him
of her,
through a flickering
there is
television
a strange
screen
freedom
and changed the course
in
of his
reaching this
life.
stage of life,
In this deeply
a
personal
freedom that
and
comes from
emotionally
surviving
resonant
enough
memoir,
to know who you are.
Nelson Messias
I no longer
traces
look
the
for
invisible
miracles. I
thread
no longer
that
chase
connected him
validation.
to Nora
I no
Aunor,
longer shrink
the
myself
Philippines'
to
most
fit into
iconic
places that
and
don't
human
deserve me.
national artist.
I live
Through
with
her
truth.
films,
I
The
live
Raw
with dignity.
Devotion
I
of
live with
Bona, the
compassion. I
volcanic
live with
honesty
courage.
of Ina Ka
Not because
ng
she
Anak
taught me
Mo,
to imitate her,
the
but
haunting
because she taught me to
injustice of
become
Bulaklak sa
myself.
city jail,
Her influence is
the
no longer
moral
a
weight
shadow.
of Tatlong
It is a
Taong Walang
foundation.
Diyos, the quiet
And on that
ache
foundation,
of
I continue to
Bakubuhang
build a
Langit,
life that
and the
feels
spiritual
honest,
devastation of Himala.
steady,
He found courage,
and fully
compassion,
mine.
and a mirror
Boy who
to his
dreamed
own
of Nora
struggles.
Aunor,
Raised in hardship,
the meaning of a life
shaped
well
by
lived.
migration, and strengthened
Watching
by
her
survival,
journey,
Nelson writes
the
with a
rise,
voice
the
that is
fall,
both
the
tender
brilliance,
and
the
unflinching.
mistakes, the
He
survival,
explores how a child
taught
from
me
the
something I
slums
never learned from
carried the
success
light of a
stories.
superstar into
A
adulthood.
life is not measured
How
by
an immigrant
perfection.
learned to
A
rebuild
life is
himself
measured
in
by
a foreign
impact.
land.
And she had
how
impact,
grief
not
transformed
just on
into
cinema,
gratitude
not just on the
after
nation, but on
passing of the
people like
woman
me.
who unknowingly raised
People
him.
who saw
This
themselves in her
memoir
eyes.
is not a biography
People
of
who
Nora
found
Aunor.
courage in her
It is a
silence.
testament to the power
People who learned
of connection,
dignity
the
from her
kind that
defiance.
forms across screens,
People who understood
across
humanity
oceans,
through her flaws.
across lives. It
If
is a
I can leave
story
even a
about the
fraction
people
of that
who shape
impact on
us
someone
even
else,
from afar.
my life will have
The
been worth
artists who
living,
give us
the
language
future
for
I
our
want to
pain
leave
and
behind.
the unexpected ways love can enter
As I move
life
forward, I
and
think
stay
about the
there.
legacy I want
Told
to
with
leave,
humility,
not in fame, not in
emotional clarity,
applause,
and
but in the
quiet
quiet
dignity of
ways a
someone who
life
has lived
touches
through
another.
storms. The boy
I
who
want to live with
dreamed of Nora
honesty.
Aunor
I want to live with
is a
kindness.
celebration
I
of
want to live with
resilience,
courage. I want to live
memory,
with
and the
dignity.
enduring power of
These
art
are the gifts she
to
gave
save
me.
us. It is
These
for
are the gifts I
fans
want to pass
who saw
on.
themselves in her eyes.
Because legacy
For
is
the
not about
dreamers
being
who
remembered
held on
by
to
many.
hope.
Legacy
And for anyone
136.
who has ever been changed by a story, a performance,
Chapter
or a single
24
unforgettable
is
voice.
about being
A
remembered by
memoir
someone.
of devotion,
And I know
survival,
this.
and the light
I will
that
remember
never
her
left
for the
him.
rest of my
The
life.
boy who
She
dreamed
lives
of Nora
on.
Aunor.
In the
Yoso,
future, I choose
some
Nora
dreams save
Aunor
us,
is gone from
long
this
before we
world, but she is
understand
not
why.
gone from my
For a young
story.
boy growing up in poverty
She lives in the
Philippines,
choices I make.
that salvation
She
came
lives in
the
the
form
strength
of a
I
woman he
carry.
ever met.
She
A
lives in
woman
the
whose
compassion
voice,
I offer.
eyes,
She lives
and
in the truth I
truth
speak.
reached him
She
through a
lives in the
flickering
dignity I
television screen
protect.
and changed
She
the
lives in
course
the
of his life.
future I am still
In this
building.
deeply personal
A future
and
shaped
emotionally
by her
resonant
brilliance, her
memoir, Nelson
humanity,
Messiahs
her courage,
traces the
her
invisible thread
flaws, her
that connected
legacy.
him to Nora Aunor,
Life goes
the
on,
Philippines' most iconic
and so does
human
she.
national
Not as a
artist.
star in the
Through her
sky,
films,
but as
the
a
raw
light in my
devotion
heart.
of Bona, the
25.
volcanic
Chapter
honesty
25,
of Ina
Finding
Khan
Home
and
After
Anak
Everything
Mo,
Tea.
the
Here comes a
haunting
point in life
injustice of
when you
Bulaklak
stop
sa
asking,
Sinjar,
where do I
the
belong?
moral
And start
weight
asking,
of
where do I feel at
Tatlong
peace?
Walang Diyos, the
For
quiet
years I
ache
thought home
of
was a place.
Bakibuhaong Langit,
The
and
Philippines
the
of my
spiritual
childhood, the
devastation
streets
of
I grew up
Himala,
on,
he
the
found
memories I
courage,
carried like fragile
compassion,
glass.
and a mirror to
Then
his
I
own
thought
struggles.
home was a
Raised in
person.
hardship, shaped
woman
by
whose
migration
films
and
raised me,
strengthened by survival.
whose voice shaped
Nelson
my
writes with a
conscience,
voice that is both
whose
tender
humanity
and
taught me
unflinching.
compassion.
He explores how a
But as I
child
moved through
from the
grief,
slums
healing,
carried the light of a
and
superstar
acceptance,
into adulthood.
I realized something
How an
deeper.
immigrant learned to rebuild himself
Home
in a
is not a
foreign land.
place.
And how grief
Home is not a
transformed
burden.
into
Home
gratitude
is the life you
after the
build
passing
from
of the woman
everything
who
you've
unknowingly
survived.
raised him.
Chapter
This memoir is not
25.
a biography of Nora
The
Aunor.
Philippines that lives
It is a
inside.
testament to
Even
the
after
power
decades
of
abroad,
connection,
the Philippines
kind
never
that
left me.
forms across
It lived in my
screens,
accent, in
across
my humor,
oceans,
in the way I
across
cooked
lives.
rice,
It is a story
in the way I
about the
carried
people
myself
who
with
shape
quiet
us
dignity.
even from afar. The
It lived in the
artists who
memories
give
of
us language
poverty,
for our
in the
pain,
resilience I
in the
learned
unexpected
early,
ways
in the
love
dreams I
can
carried
enter
like
a
hidden
life and
seeds.
stay there. Told
It lived in
with
the
humility,
films that shaped my
emotional
soul.
clarity, and the quiet
The truth
dignity
of
someone
Himala,
who has lived through
the
storms.
fire of Gamu
The boy
Gamu,
who
the
dreamed
tenderness
of
of
Nora
Bakit
Aunor
Bughao
is a
ang Langit,
celebration of
the courage of
resilience,
Andrea.
memory,
Her
and the
films,
enduring power of
Bulaklak sa
art
City
to
Jail,
save us.
Inaka
It is
ng
for
Anak
the
Mo,
fans
and
who saw
Bona
themselves
were
in
not
her
just
eyes,
stories.
for the dreamers
They were
who held on
reflections
to
of the
hope,
Filipino
and for
struggle
anyone
and
who has
reminders
ever
of
been
the world
changed
I
by a
came from.
story, a performance,
It lived in the
or a
woman who
single
became my
unforgettable
compass.
voice.
Not
A memoir
perfect,
of devotion,
not flawless,
survival,
but
and
real.
the light that never left.
The Philippines
The boy
was
who
no
dreamed
longer
of
a
Nora
country I
Aunor,
left.
Yoso,
It was a country I carried.
some dreams
The country
save
that
us,
became my second
long
skin living
before we
abroad
understand
taught me
why.
something the
For
boy
a
in the
young boy
photograph
growing up
never
in poverty
understood.
in the Philippines,
You can belong
that
to more than
salvation
one
came in the
place.
form of a woman he never met, a
39.
woman
The boy
whose
who dreamed
voice,
of Nora Aunor Canada
eyes,
became a different
and
kind of
truth
home.
reached him
A place
through a
where I
flickering
learned
television
independence,
screen
where
and
I
changed the
built
course
a
of his
life with my own
In this
hands,
deeply
where I
personal
discovered
and
strength I
emotionally
didn't know I
resonant memoir,
had.
Nelson
It was
Messias
here that I learned to
traces
speak
the
up.
invisible thread that
It was
connected
here that
him
I learned to
Nora
stand
Aunor,
tall.
the Philippines' most
It was here that I
iconic
learned
and
to
human
love
national
without
artist.
fear.
Through her
It was here that I
films, the
learned
raw
to forgive
devotion
myself.
of Bona, the
And
volcanic
slowly, without
honesty
realizing it,
of Ina
this country
Khan
became
and
part
Anak
of me
Mo,
too.
the haunting
Not
injustice
replacing
of
the
Bulaklak,
Philippines,
the city jail,
but
the
expanding
moral
me,
weight
the identity
of
I built
Tatlong
from
Taong
two
Walang
worlds.
Diyos,
There was a
the
time when I
quiet
felt
ache
torn.
of
Too
Bakibuhang
Filipino
Langit,
for the West,
and the
too
spiritual
westernized
devastation
for the
of Himala. He
Philippines.
found courage,
But grief has a way of
compassion,
clarifying
and a
things.
mirror to his
Loss
own
strips
struggles.
away the
Raised in
unnecessary.
hardship, shaped
It
by
leaves only
migration,
truth.
and strengthened
And
by
the truth
survival,
was simple.
Nelson writes
I am
with
both.
a voice that is both
I am all.
tender and
I am
unflinching.
enough.
He explores
I
how
am
a
the boy who
child
grew up
from the
poor.
slums
I am the
carried
man
the
who
light
built
of
a life
superstar
abroad.
into adulthood.
I am the
How
fan
an
who
immigrant
loved a
learned to
flawed,
rebuild
brilliant
himself
woman.
in a foreign land.
I am the
and how
adult who
grief
learned to stand on his
transformed
own.
into gratitude
I am the
after
Filipino
passing of the
who
woman
carries his
unknowingly
homeland
raised
in
him.
his bones.
This memoir
I am the
is not a
immigrant
biography
who found
of
strength in
Nora
a
Aunor.
new world.
It is a testament to the
140,
power
chapter
of connection,
25.
the kind that forms across
My identity is not
screens,
divided.
across
It is
oceans,
layered.
across lives.
It is whole.
It is a
the home I
story
found in
about the
myself.
people who shape us even from afar.
After Nora
artists
passed,
who give
after
us
the grief
language for our
softened, after
pain,
the world
and
moved
the
on,
unexpected
I realized
ways
something
love
I'd never
can
understood
enter a
before.
life
I had
and stay
become
there.
my own home.
Told with humility,
Not because I stopped
emotional
loving her,
clarity,
not
and the
because I
quiet
stopped
dignity of
needing
someone who has
connection,
lived through storms.
but because I
The boy
finally
who
learned to
dreamed
live
of
with
Nora
myself,
Aunor is a
fully,
celebration
honestly,
of
gently.
resilience,
Her
memory,
influence
and
shaped
the
me.
enduring power
Her humanity
of art
humbled
to save
me.
us.
Her
It is for the
flaws
fans
freed me.
who saw
Her
themselves
legacy
in her
strengthened
eyes,
me.
for the dreamers
But the
who
life
held
I
on to
built,
hope, and
the
for
healing,
anyone
the
who has ever been
courage, the
changed
dignity
by a story,
that came
a
from me.
performance, or
And
a
that
single
realization felt like
unforgettable
coming
voice.
home,
A
the future
memoir
I
of
walked
devotion,
toward,
survival,
with her light.
and the light that never left
I don't
him.
know what the future
The boy
holds.
who dreamed of
None
Nora
of us
Aunor.
do.
Yoso,
But I know this.
some
I
dreams
walk
save
into
us,
it carrying
long
everything she
before we
gave me,
understand
not
why.
as weight, but
For a
as
young boy
light.
growing up in
141,
poverty in
the
the
boy who
Philippines,
dreamed of Nora
that
Aunor,
salvation
the
came
truth
in
she
the
taught
form
me,
of a
the
woman he
courage she
never met, a
inspired,
woman
the
whose
compassion she
voice,
awakened,
eyes,
the dignity
and
she
truth
embodied,
reached him
the
through a
humanity
flickering
she
television
revealed.
screen and changed the course
She is
of his
gone
life.
from this world,
In this deeply
but she is
personal
not gone
and
from my
emotionally
story.
resonant memoir,
She
Nelson
lives in my
Messias
choices.
traces the invisible
She lives in my
thread
strength.
that connected him
She lives
to
in my
Nora
heart.
Aunor, the Philippines'
And wherever
most
life takes
iconic
me
and
next,
human national
I
artist.
carry her with me,
Through her
not
films,
as a
the
star
raw
in the
devotion
sky,
of Bona,
but as a
the
home
volcanic honesty
inside my
of
soul.
Ina Khan,
Chapter 26.
the haunting
The
injustice
purpose
of
I
Bulaklak
found
sa
after
City
losing her
Jail,
teeth.
the moral
Here
weight
comes a
of
moment after
Tatlong
grief,
Taong Walang
when the
Diyos,
world world becomes quiet
ache
again.
of Bakibuhaw
Not empty,
Langit,
just
and the
quiet.
spiritual devastation
A
of Himawa,
stillness
he
settles
found
in.
courage, compassion,
The kind that invites
and a mirror
reflection
to his own
rather than
struggles.
sorrow.
Raised in
After
hardship,
Nora passed,
shaped
after
by
the tributes
migration,
faded,
and
after the
strengthened
news
by
cycle moved
survival,
on, I
Nelson
found
writes with a
myself
voice that is
asking a
both
question
tender
I had never
and
asked
unflinching.
before.
He explores how a child
What do I do
from
with the life I
slums
still have?
carried the light of a superstar
Because losing
into
someone who
adulthood.
shaped you
How an
forces you to
immigrant
confront
learned
your
to
own
rebuild
time,
himself in a
your
foreign
own
land,
aging,
and
your
how
own
grief
dreams, your
transformed
own
into
unfinished
gratitude
chapters.
after the passing of the
Her
woman
story
who
was
unknowingly raised
complete,
him.
mine wasn't.
This memoir
43,
is
the
not a
boy
biography
who dreamed
of
of Nora
Aunor.
Aunor.
It is a testament
The
to
mirror
the
that
power
loss
of
creates
connection,
grief
the
is a
kind that
mirror.
forms across screens,
It shows you
across
your own
oceans,
face, your own
across
years,
lives.
your own
It is a
mortality.
story about the people who
I began
shape
to see
us
my life
even
differently,
from afar.
not as a series of
The
struggles I
artists who give us
survived,
language for our
but
pain,
as a story
and the
I was still
unexpected
writing.
ways
I thought
love
about the
can
boy I
enter
used
a
to
life
be,
and stay.
the man I became,
Told with humility,
and the person I still wanted to
emotional
grow
clarity,
into.
and the quiet dignity
And for
of
the first
someone who has
time,
lived through
I
storms.
understood that
The boy
purpose
who
is not
dreamed of
something
Nora
you
Aunor
chase.
is a celebration
Purpose
of
is something you
resilience,
choose,
memory,
the lessons she
and
left
the
for my
enduring
future.
power of art to
Her
save
life,
us.
the
It is
brilliance, the
for the fans
mistakes,
who
the
saw themselves
resilience
in her eyes,
became a map
for the dreamers
for the years
who
ahead.
held on to hope, and for
From
anyone
her I learned
who has ever been
to live with
changed
truth,
by a
not
story,
performance,
a performance,
to love
or
with
a
courage,
single
not
unforgettable
fear,
voice.
to
A
accept
memoir
flaws,
of devotion,
not hide them,
survival,
to
and a
rise
light
after
that never
failure,
left
not
him.
pretend
The boy
it
who
didn't
dreamed of
happen,
Nora Aunor.
to create meaning,
Yoso,
not wait
some
for
dreams save
miracles.
us
These were not
long
lessons
before
for
we
childhood.
understand why.
These
For
were
a young
lessons
boy
for
growing up in
adulthood,
poverty in the Philippines,
for the years when you
that
finally
salvation
understand that
came in
time
the
is
form of a
finite
woman he never
and
met,
every
a woman
choice
whose
matters.
voice,
Chapter
eyes,
26.
and truth reached him through a flickering television screen
Aging
and
with
changed the course of
grace,
his life.
not
In this
fear.
deeply
There was a
personal
time when
and
aging frightened
emotionally
me.
resonant memoir,
The idea of
Nelson
becoming
Messias
irrelevant,
traces
the
the
idea of
invisible
losing
thread
strength,
that connected him
the idea
to
of
Nora
fading
Aunor,
the way she
the
did in her
Philippines'
later
most
years.
iconic and human
But
national
watching her
artist.
taught me
Through
something
her films,
unexpected.
the raw devotion of
Aging
Bona,
is not a
the
decline.
volcanic honesty
Aging is a
of
deepening.
Ina Ka ng
Her
Anak
later
Mo,
performances,
the haunting
quieter,
injustice of
slower, more
Bulaklak to sit in
fragile,
jail,
carried a
the
depth
moral
her younger
weight
roles
of
never could.
Tatlong Taong Walang Diyos,
And I realized that
the
my own
quiet
aging
ache
could be the
of
same.
Bakibuhaong
Not a
Langit,
loss, but
and
an
the spiritual
expansion.
devastation of Himala,
A chance
he
to
found
live with more
courage,
honesty, more compassion, more
and a mirror
clarity.
to his own
A
struggles.
chance to become
Raised in
someone I would have
hardship,
admired when I
shaped
was
by
young, the
migration,
legacy.
and strengthened by survival.
I want to leave
Nelson
behind.
writes with a voice that is both
Her
tender
passing made me
and
think about my
unflinching.
own
He
legacy,
explores how a
not in
child
fame, not
from
in
the slums
applause,
carried the light
but in the
of a
quiet ways a
superstar
life
into
touches
adulthood.
another.
How an
I want
immigrant
to leave
learned to
behind
rebuild himself in a foreign
kindness
land,
that
and
softens
how
someone's
grief
day,
transformed
courage
into
that
gratitude
inspires someone to
after the
stand up
passing
when
of the
hurt
woman
and
who
worried.
unknowingly
The boy who
raised him.
dreamed of
This
Nora
memoir
Aunor.
is not a biography of Nora Aunor.
Honesty that
It is a
helps someone
testament
face
to
their
the
truth.
power of connection.
Dignity
The kind
that
forms
reminds
across
someone of their
screens,
worth.
across oceans,
Compassion that
across
heals
lives.
someone's wound.
It is a story
These are the
about
gifts
the people
she
who
gave me.
shape us
These
even
are the
from
gifts
afar.
I want to
The
pass
artists
on.
who give us language for our
Legacy
pain,
is not
and
about
the
being
unexpected
remembered by
ways
many.
love can
Legacy
enter a
is
life
about being
and stay there.
remembered by
Told
someone.
with humility,
And I
emotional
know this.
clarity, and
I
the
will
quiet
remember
dignity
her
of
for the
someone
rest
who
of
has
my
lived
life.
through storms.
The purpose
boy
I
who
choose
dreamed
now.
of Nora Aunor
As I
is a
move forward,
celebration
I no
of
longer
resilience,
ask what life owes
memory,
me. I
and
ask
the
what I can
enduring
offer.
power of art
I no longer
to save
ask what
us.
I lost.
It is for the
I
fans
ask what I
who
can
saw
give.
themselves in
I no
her
longer
eyes,
ask who
for the
will guide me.
dreamers who held on to
I ask
hope,
who I can
and
guide.
for anyone who
Her
has
story
ever been
shaped my
changed
past.
by a
Her
story,
legacy
a
shapes my
performance,
future.
or a
And
single
now in this
unforgettable
chapter of my
voice.
life,
A memoir
I
of
choose to live with
devotion,
intention,
survival,
carry
and the
her
light
truth,
that
to
never
honor
left
her
him. The
humanity,
boy
to
who dreamed
continue
of
the
Nora
light she
Aunor,
left behind.
Yoso,
She is
some
gone
dreams
from this
save
world,
us,
but she is
long
not
before we
gone from my
understand why.
purpose.
For a young boy growing
She
up
lives in the
poverty
life I'm still
Philippines,
building.
that salvation
She lives
came
in the
form of
choices
a
I
woman
make.
he never met, a
She
woman
lives in the
whose
person
voice,
I'm becoming.
eyes, and truth reached
Chapter
him
26.
through a flickering television
And as long as
screen
I carry
and
her
changed the
forward,
course of
her
his life.
story
In
continues
this deeply
through
personal
me.
and
Which I'm
emotionally
in
resonant
27.
memoir,
Chapter 27,
Nelson
how her
Messias
story
traces
shaped the way I
invisible
love.
thread that connected him
To here
to
are
Nora
lessons you
Aunor,
learn from
the
childhood,
Philippines'
and there
most
are lessons
iconic
you
and
only
human
understand when
national
you're
artist.
older,
Through her films,
when you've
the raw
lived enough,
devotion of
hurt
Bona,
enough,
the
healed
volcanic
enough to see
honesty
love with
of
clearer
Ina Ka
eyes.
ng Anak Mo,
By this
the
chapter of my
haunting
life, I
injustice
realized
of
that
Bulaklak
everything I
sa
knew about
jail,
love,
the
its
moral
beauty,
weight of
its
Tatlong
danger,
Taong Walang Diyos,
its
the
tenderness,
quiet ache
its
of
wounds,
Bakibuhaong Langit,
was shaped
and the
not only by
spiritual
my own
devastation of
experiences
Himala, he
by the
found
woman whose
courage,
films raised me.
compassion, and a
Not
mirror
because she
to
taught me
his
how
own
to love
struggles.
perfectly,
Raised in
but because she
hardship,
taught me how to
shaped
love
by migration,
honestly,
and
the love I
strengthened by
learned from her
survival,
brilliance.
Nelson writes with a voice
From
that is
her
both
greatest
tender
roles, I
and
learned that
unflinching.
love can
He
be
explores how a
fierce,
child from the
Himala,
slums
chapter
carried the light
27,
of a superstar into
protective,
adulthood,
Gamu Gamu,
how an immigrant learned to
sacrificial,
rebuild
Flora
himself in a foreign land,
Contemplacion,
and how
patient,
grief
thy
transformed
womb,
into gratitude
painful, Tatlong
after the
Tong
passing
Walang
of the woman
Diyos,
who unknowingly raised
redemptive
him. This
Andrea.
memoir
These films
is
taught me
not a
that love
biography
is
of
not a
Nora
fairy
Aunor.
tale.
It is a testament to
Love
the
is
power
work.
of connection,
Love
the
is
kind that
truth.
forms across
Love
screens,
is
across
courage.
oceans,
But they
across
also taught me
lives.
something
It is a
deeper.
story about the people who
Love is
shape
not
us
always
even
enough
from
to save
afar.
someone.
The
but
artists
it is
who give us
always
language
enough
for
to
our
change
pain
you,
and the
the love I
unexpected
learned from
ways
her
love
mistakes.
can enter a life.
Her
and
real
stay
life, the
told with
conflicts,
humility,
the heartbreaks, the
emotional
broken
clarity,
relationships,
and the quiet
taught
dignity
me
of someone who
lessons
has lived
no
through
film could
storms.
teach.
The boy who
I learned
dreamed of
that.
Nora Aunor is
Love
a
can be
celebration
messy.
of resilience.
Love can be
memory,
complicated.
and
Love
the
can hurt the
enduring
people you
power of
care
art
about.
to save
Love
us.
can fail,
It is for the
even when you
fans
give
who saw
everything.
themselves in her eyes.
Love requires
For the dreamers
honesty,
who
not
held on to hope.
performance.
And for anyone
Love
who has
demands
ever been
boundaries,
changed
not
by a
sacrifice
story,
without
a
end.
performance,
Her mistakes
or a
became
single
warnings I carried into my
unforgettable
own
voice. A
relationships.
memoir of devotion,
They taught me to
survival,
recognize red
and the
flags,
light that
to
never
protect
left
my
her.
heart,
The
to
boy who
speak up
dreamed
when
of
something
Nora
felt
Aunor,
wrong, to
Yoso.
walk away
Some dreams save us
149.
long before we
The
understand
boy
why.
who dreamed
For
of
a young
Nora
boy
Aunor
growing
when
up in poverty in
staying
the
meant losing
Philippines, that
myself.
salvation came in the form
She
of a
didn't
woman he
teach
never
me
met,
perfect
a woman
love.
whose
She
voice,
taught me real love,
eyes,
the relationships
and
that
truth
shaped me. As
reached
I
him
moved through
through a
adulthood, I
flickering
met people who
television
taught me
screen
new kinds
and
of love.
changed the course of his
The love
life.
that heals,
In this
the
deeply
love that
personal
challenges,
and emotionally
that
resonant
disappoints, the
Nelson
love that
Messias
surprises,
traces
the
the
love that
invisible thread
stays,
that
the
connected
love that
him
leaves.
to Nora
Some
Aunor,
relationships
the
were
Philippines'
brief
most
but meaningful.
iconic and
Some were
human
painful but
national artist.
necessary. Some
Through
were
her
gentle and
films, the raw
healing. Some
devotion
taught me
of
what I
Bona,
deserved.
the
Some
volcanic
taught me what I
honesty
should never
of
accept
Ina
again.
Ka ng anak mo,
And through all
the
of them,
haunting
I carried the lessons I
injustice
learned
of
from her
Bulaklak
life,
City Jail,
not as
the
rules, but
moral weight
as
of
reminders, the
Tatlong
love I
Taong
finally
Walang
learned to
Diyos,
give
the
myself.
quiet ache of Bakibuhang
This was the hardest
Langit,
lesson of all.
and the spiritual
For years, I
devastation
gave
of
love
Himala.
freely
He
to
found
family,
courage,
to friends, to
compassion,
partners,
and a
to people who
mirror
didn't
to
always
his own
know how to
struggles.
hold it.
Raised in hardship,
D. Chapter
shaped by
27.
migration, and
But
strengthened
I
by
rarely gave
survival,
love to myself.
Nelson writes
It
with
took
a voice that
time,
is both
years,
tender
losses,
and
healing,
unflinching.
growth,
He
to
explores how a
understand that
child
self-love is
from the
not
slums
selfish. It
carried
is
the light of a
survival.
superstar into adulthood.
And strangely, it was
How
her
an immigrant
flaws,
learned to
not her
rebuild himself
brilliance,
in a
that
foreign
taught me
land,
this.
and how grief
Seeing her struggle,
transformed
seeing
into
her hurt,
gratitude
seeing her
after
break,
the
seeing
passing of the woman
her
who
rise
unknowingly
again,
raised him.
made me realize
This
that
memoir
I too
is not
deserve
a
compassion.
biography of
I
Nora
deserved
Aunor.
forgiveness.
It is
I
a
deserved
testament to
rest.
the
I
power
deserved
of
gentleness.
connection,
I
the
deserved
kind that
love.
forms across screens,
Not only from others, but
across
from
oceans,
myself, the love I
across
carry
lives.
forward.
It is a story
By
about
this
the people
chapter of
who
my
shape
life,
us
I
even
understood
from
something
afar.
I never
The
understood when I
artists
was
who give
younger.
us language for our pain,
Love is not something
the
you
unexpected
find.
ways
Love is something you
love
build,
can
and I
enter
am
life
still building
and
it.
stay there.
With the
Told
people who
with
matter,
humility,
with the life
emotional
I've
clarity,
created, with
and
the
the quiet
heart I've
dignity of
learned to
someone who has lived
protect,
through storms.
with the
The
lessons
boy
she
who
left
dreamed
behind.
of Nora Aunor is
Her
a
story shaped the way I
celebration of
love,
resilience,
not perfectly but
memory,
truthfully.
and the enduring
And now,
power
as
of
I move
art
forward,
to
I
save us.
carry that
It
truth
is for
into
the
every
fans
connection
who
I
saw
make.
themselves in her eyes, for the
151,
dreamers
the boy
who
who
held on
dreamed
to
of Nora
hope,
Aunor.
and for anyone
I
who has
love with
ever been
honesty.
changed
I
by a
love
story,
with dignity.
a
I
performance,
love with
or a
courage. I love with
single,
compassion.
unforgettable voice.
Because she
A
did.
memoir of
And because I
devotion,
finally learned to do the
survival,
same.
and the light
Dude,
that never
28,
left
chapter
him.
28.
The boy who dreamed
The
of Nora
quiet
Aunor.
joys that found me
Yoso,
again.
some dreams save us.
Here's a kind of
long
peace that
before we
only
understand
arrives
why.
after you've
For a young
lived through
boy
enough
growing up in
storms.
poverty in the Philippines,
Not the loud
that
piece of
salvation
triumph,
came in
not
the
the
form of a
dramatic
woman
piece
he
of
never met,
closure,
a woman whose
but the
voice,
soft, steady
eyes,
peace that settles
and
into your
truth
bones when you
reached him
finally stop
through a
running from
flickering
your own
television
life.
screen and changed
After
the course of his
everything,
life.
the poverty,
In this
the
deeply
migration,
personal
the
and emotionally
survival, the
resonant
heartbreak,
memoir,
the
Nelson
grief of
Messias
losing her,
traces the
I
invisible
found myself
thread
entering a
that connected
chapter I
him
never
to Nora Aunor,
expected.
the Philippines' most
A
iconic
chapter of
and
quiet
human
joy.
national artist. Through her
Not the
films,
joy of
the raw
youth,
devotion
not the joy of
Bona,
escape,
the volcanic
not the joy of
honesty
dreams
Ina
still
Ka
untouched
ng
by
anak mo,
reality.
the haunting
This
injustice
was a different
of
kind of
Bulaklak
joy.
City Jail,
A mature joy,
the moral
a
weight
grounded
of
joy,
Tatlong
a joy
Taong Walang Diyos,
that came from
the
knowing
quiet
who I
ache
am
of
and what I've
Bakibuhang Langit,
survived.
and the
153, the
spiritual
boy who dreamed
devastation
of Nora
Himala.
Aunor.
He
The
found
small
courage,
things that became big.
compassion,
As I grew
and a
older, I
mirror
realized that
to his
joy
own
doesn't always
struggles.
come from
Raised in
grand
hardship,
moments.
shaped
Sometimes
by
it comes
migration,
from
and
a
strengthened by
morning
survival.
coffee in
Nelson
silence,
writes with a voice that is
a
both
walk
tender
under
and
soft
unflinching.
sunlight,
He
a
explores
familiar
how a child
song
from
playing
the slums
unexpectedly,
carried the light
a
of
message from
superstar
someone
into
who
adulthood.
remembers you,
How an immigrant
a
learned
meal
to
cooked
rebuild
with
himself
care,
in a foreign land,
a memory
and how
that
grief
warms Sometimes,
transformed
instead of
into
hurts,
gratitude after the
a
passing of
film
the woman who
scene that
unknowingly
feels like an
raised him.
old friend.
This
These
memoir
small
is not
things
a
and things I once
biography of Nora
overlooked
Aunor.
became
It is a
anchors.
testament to the
They
power
reminded me that
of
life doesn't
connection,
need to
the
be
kind that forms
extraordinary to
across
be
screens,
meaningful.
across
It only
oceans,
needs to be
across
honest.
lives.
The peace
It is
that
a
comes from
story about the
acceptance.
people who shape us
There was a
even from
time when I
afar.
fought life,
The artists who
fought
give
my
us language
past,
for our
fought
pain,
my
and the
fears,
unexpected
fought my
ways
mistakes,
love can
fought my
enter a life
aging,
and stay
fought
there.
my grief.
Told with
But
humility,
acceptance changed
emotional
everything.
clarity, and the quiet dignity
Acceptance
of someone
didn't
who has
mean
lived
giving
through
up. It
storms.
meant
The boy who
letting go of
dreamed
the
of Nora
battles that were
Aunor
never mine
is a
to win.
celebration of resilience.
It meant
memory,
understanding that.
and the enduring
Or
power
chapter
of
28.
art to save
Not
us.
every dream needs
It
to
is
come
for the
true.
fans who
Not
saw
every
themselves in
wound
her
needs to be
eyes,
reopened.
for the dreamers
Not every
who held on to
loss
hope,
needs to be
and for
explained.
anyone
Not
who
every
has ever
question
been
needs an
changed
answer.
by a story a performance,
Acceptance
or a
gave me
single
peace.
unforgettable voice.
Peace gave me
A
clarity.
memoir of devotion,
Clarity
survival,
gave me joy.
and the light that never
The
left
joy
him.
of remembering
The boy
without
who
pain.
dreamed of
There
Nora Aunor.
came a day when I realized I could think of Nora
Some
without the
dreams
heaviness
save
in my
us,
chest.
long
Not because
before
I
we
loved her
understand
less,
why.
but
For a
because
young
I had
boy
learned
growing
to
up in
carry her
poverty in the
differently.
Philippines, that
Her memory
salvation
no
came
longer
in the
felt like a
form of
wound.
woman he never met,
It felt like a
woman
blessing.
whose voice,
I could watch her
eyes,
scenes again,
and
the truth in her
reached
eyes,
him
the quiet
through a
power in her
flickering television
silence,
screen
and feel
changed
warmth
the
instead
course
of
his
grief.
life. In this
I could talk about her
personal
with pride,
and emotionally
not
resonant
sadness.
memoir.
I could celebrate her
Nelson
legacy
Messias
without mourning her
traces the
absence.
invisible thread that
This was a
connected
new
him
kind of
to Nora
joy,
Aunor, the
the
Philippines'
joy
most
of remembering
iconic
without
and
hurting.
human national artist. Through her films,
boy
the
who
raw
dreamed of
devotion
Nora
Bona,
Aunor.
the volcanic
The life I
honesty
learned to live
of
slowly.
Ina
For
Khan
most of my
and
life, I
Anak Mo,
moved fast,
the haunting
fast to
injustice
survive,
of Bulak
fast
Lak
to
City
adapt,
Jail,
fast to
the
prove
moral
myself,
weight of
fast
Tatlong
to
Taong
outrun the
Walang
shadows
Diyos,
of my
the
past.
quiet ache
But
of
now in this
Bakabuhang
chapter, I
Langit,
learned to live
and the spiritual
slowly, to
devastation of
breathe,
Himawa,
to
who
rest,
found
to
courage,
savor, to notice.
compassion,
I learned that
and a mirror to
slowness
his own
is not
struggles.
laziness.
Raised in hardship,
Slowness
shaped
is
by
presence.
migration, and
It
strengthened
is
by
the art
survival,
of being here,
Nelson writes with a
fully,
voice that is
gently,
both tender
gratefully.
and unflinching. He
And in that
explores how a
slowness,
child
I
from
found
the
a joy
slums
I had never known
carried
before,
the light of a
the joy
superstar into
of
adulthood.
becoming myself.
How an
Perhaps the
immigrant
greatest
learned to
joy of all
rebuild
was
himself in a
realizing that I
foreign
had
land,
finally become
and
someone
how
I
grief
recognized,
transformed into
someone I
gratitude
respected, someone I
after the
understood,
passing of the woman
someone
who
I could live
unknowingly
with.
raised him.
I was
This
no longer the
memoir
boy
is not
searching
a
for
biography
miracles.
of
I was
Nora
no
Aunor.
longer the
It is
young
a
man
testament to
chasing
the
belonging.
power of
I was no
connection,
longer the
kind that
grieving
forms
fan
across
holding on to the
screens,
past.
across oceans,
I was simply
across
myself,
lives. It is a
whole,
story about
steady,
the people who shape
peaceful.
us even from afar.
And that I
The
realized
artists who give us
was the
language for our
quiet
pain
miracle
and the
of
unexpected
this
ways
chapter.
love can enter a life
Chapter
and stay
28.
there.
The
Told
joy
with
that
humility,
lives beside the memory
emotional
of her
clarity,
joy and grief
and the
can live
quiet
together.
dignity of someone who has lived through
Peace and
storms.
longing can share the
boy
same
who
heart.
dreamed of Nora Aunor
Love
is a
and loss
celebration
can
of resilience,
coexist without
memory,
contradiction.
and the enduring power
She is
of
gone,
art to save us.
but the
It is
joy
for
she
the fans
planted in
who
me
saw themselves
remains.
in her eyes.
It
For
lives
the
in the
dreamers
way I
who
see
held
the
on to
world.
hope,
It
and for
lives in the
anyone
way I
who has ever
cherish
been
small
changed by a
moments.
story, a performance,
It lives in the
or
way
a
I
single
carry her
unforgettable
legacy with
voice.
gentleness,
A memoir
not
of devotion,
sorrow.
survival,
She
and the
shaped my
light that
past.
never left him.
She
The
softened
boy
my
who dreamed
grief.
of Nora Aunor.
She brightened my
Yoso,
present.
some dreams
And
save
now
us
in this chapter
long
of
before
quiet
we
joy,
understand why.
I
For a
carry
young
her
boy
not
growing
as
up
a
in poverty
wound,
in the Philippines,
but as a
that
light.
salvation came in the form of a
5729.
woman he never
Chapter
met, a woman
29.
whose voice,
Walking
eyes,
into the future
and
with
truth
open hands.
reached him
T,
through
here
a
comes a
flickering
moment in
television
life
screen
when the
and
past
changed the
stops
course of
pulling
his
you
life.
backward
In
and
this
the
deeply
future stops
personal
frightening
and
you. A
emotionally
moment
resonant
when you
memoir,
realize that everything
Nelson
you've lived
Messias
through,
traces
the
the
poverty,
invisible
the
thread that
migration, the
connected him
heartbreaks,
to
the
Nora Aunor,
survival,
the
the grief
Philippines'
of
most
losing her,
iconic and human
has shaped
national
you
artist.
into someone
Through
steady,
her films, the
someone
raw
grounded,
devotion of Bona,
someone ready.
the volcanic honesty
By this
of
chapter, I
Ina
no longer
Khan
carried
and
my
Anak
past
Mo,
like a burden.
the haunting injustice
carried it
of
like a
Bulak
map.
Lak City Jail,
Not to
the
repeat
moral
the same
weight
roads,
of
but to
Tatlong
understand
Taong
how
Walang
far
Diyos,
I'd already
the
traveled.
quiet ache of
158,
Bakabuhang
chapter
Langit,
29.
and the spiritual
The
devastation
future
of
that no
Himawa.
longer
He found
scares me.
courage, compassion,
There was a time when
and
the
a
future
mirror
felt like a
to his own
threat.
struggles.
A
Raised
place
in
filled with
hardship,
uncertainty,
shaped by
aging,
migration, and
loss, and the
strengthened by
fear of
survival,
becoming invisible.
Nelson writes with a voice that is both
But now
tender
the future
and
feels
unflinching.
different.
He explores
Feels
how
like
a child
a
from the
quiet
slums
morning waiting to
carried the
unfold,
light of a
a
superstar into
chapter I
adulthood.
get to write with
How
intention,
an immigrant
a
learned to
space
rebuild
where I
himself
can
in a
finally
foreign
breathe,
land, and
a
how
life
grief
that belongs to me,
transformed
not
into
to my
gratitude
fears.
I don't
after the
chase
passing
miracles
of the
anymore.
woman
I don't
who
chase
unknowingly
approval.
raised
I
him.
don't chase
This memoir
belonging.
is not
I
a
walk forward with
biography of
open
Nora Aunor.
hands,
It is a
ready to
testament
receive
the
whatever
power
life
of
offers,
connection,
ready to
the
let go
kind that forms
whatever it
across
takes away.
screens, across
The wisdom
oceans,
earned from a
across
lifetime of
lives.
surviving
It is a
wisdom
story about
doesn't
the people
arrive
who
suddenly.
shape us
It
even
gathers
from afar.
slowly in the
The artists
cracks,
who give us
in the
language for our
losses,
pain,
in the moments you
and the
think you can't
unexpected
go on
ways
but
love
do anyway.
can enter a life
My
and
wisdom
stay
came from
told with humility,
the strength I
emotional
learned from her
clarity,
films,
and the
the
quiet dignity of someone
compassion
who
I
has
learned
lived
from
through
her
storms.
flaws.
The boy who
59.
dreamed of Nora Aunor
The boy who
is a
dreamed of Nora
celebration
Aunor.
of resilience,
The resilience
memory,
I learned from her
and the
downfall,
enduring
fall,
power
the
of art
acceptance
to
I
save
learned from
us.
her passing,
It is for the
the
fans
peace
who
I
saw
learned from my
themselves
own
in her
healing.
eyes.
I no longer
For the
measure my
dreamers
life by
who
what I
held on to
haven't
hope.
achieved.
And for anyone
I
who
measure
has
by what
ever
I've
been changed
survived
by a story,
and who I've
a
become
performance,
because of it.
or a single
The life I
unforgettable
continue
voice.
to build,
A memoir
one
of
gentle day at a
devotion,
time.
survival, and
I
the
don't
light
need
that
grand
never
plans.
left him.
I don't
The
need
boy who
dramatic
dreamed of Nora
reinventions.
Aunor.
I don't need to prove
Yoso,
anything to anyone.
some dreams save
I want a
us
life that feels
long
honest,
before we understand
a life
why.
that feels
For a
peaceful,
young boy growing up
a
in
life that
poverty
feels
in
like
the
mine,
Philippines,
a life
that
where
salvation came in the form of a
I
woman
wake up
he
with
never met, a
gratitude.
woman whose
I move
voice,
through the day with
eyes,
dignity
and truth
I love with
reached
gentleness.
him through a flickering
I
television
rest
screen
without guilt.
and changed the course of his
I
life.
remember her with
In this
warmth,
deeply
not pain.
personal
This is the
and
future I
emotionally
choose,
resonant
not
memoir,
loud, not
Nelson
perfect,
Messias
but
traces the
deeply,
invisible
quietly
thread
meaningful.
that connected him to
160,
Nora Aunor,
chapter
the
29.
Philippines' most
The light I
iconic
carry
and human
forward.
national
Her
artist.
story shaped
Through
my
her
past.
films, the raw devotion
Her legacy
of
shapes
Bona,
my future.
the volcanic
But
honesty
the life I live
of
now,
Ina Ka
the choices
ng
I
Anak
make,
Mo,
the peace I
haunting
protect,
injustice
the
of
love I
Bulaklak
give,
sa city
that comes
jail,
from me.
the moral weight
I walk
of Tat
forward
Long
with her
Tang
light, but I
Walang
walk
Diyos,
on my
the
own
quiet
feet.
ache of
And that,
Bakabuhaw
I realize,
Langit,
is the
and the
true
spiritual
ending of
devastation
grief.
of Himala. He found
Not forgetting,
courage,
but
compassion,
continuing.
and a mirror
Not letting go
to
of
his
her,
own
but
struggles.
letting go of the
Raised in
pain.
hardship,
Not
shaped
closing
by
the book,
migration, and
but turning
strengthened
the
by
page.
survival, Nelson writes with a
WXD130,
voice that is both
chapter
tender
30, The
and
Woman I
unflinching.
Loved Without
He
Knowing.
explores how a
ASI went
child
deeper
from the
into the
slums
life Nora made
carried
for
the light of a
herself.
superstar
The
into
triumphs, the
adulthood.
wounds, the
How an
brilliance, the
immigrant
storms.
learned to rebuild
I
himself
realized
in a
something
foreign
I had
land,
never admitted
and how
out loud.
grief transformed into
I loved her.
gratitude after the
Not in the way
passing of the
fans
woman
love
who
a celebrity.
unknowingly raised him.
Not in the way
This
audiences
memoir
love a
is not
performer,
a biography of
but in the
Nora
way a
Aunor.
soul
It is a
recognizes
testament to
another
the
soul.
power
Through
of
truth,
connection,
through
the
empathy,
kind that forms
through
across
shared
screens,
humanity.
across oceans.
I didn't know her
across
personally.
lives.
I never
It is a
sat with
story
her,
about
never
the people
heard her
who
laugh
shape
in
us
real life,
even from afar.
never listened to her
The
stories
artists who
from
give
her
us
own
language
mouth.
for our pain,
But I
and
knew her in the
unexpected
ways that mattered.
love can
I
enter
knew
a
her
life
through the eyes
and
that
stay there.
carried storms.
Told with humility,
I knew her through
emotional
the
clarity,
voice that held
and
a
the quiet
nation.
dignity of someone
I
who has
knew
lived
her
through
through the
storms.
162
The boy who dreamed of Nora Aunor
chapter
is a
30,
celebration of resilience,
silence that
memory,
spoke louder
and the
than
enduring
dialogue.
power of
I knew her
art
through the
to
pain she
save
never
us.
hid.
It is for the
I knew her
fans
through the
who
truth
saw
she
themselves in
embodied.
her eyes,
And
for
that
the
was enough,
dreamers
the
who
empathy
held
that
on to
grew without
hope,
permission.
and for anyone
I
who
didn't
has
choose
ever
to
been
empathize
changed
with her.
by a
It
story,
happened
a
naturally.
performance,
The way you
or
feel
a
for someone who
single
mirrors your own
unforgettable
struggles.
voice. A
Her
memoir
sadness
of
felt
devotion,
familiar.
survival,
Her triumphs felt
and the light
personal.
that never left
Her
him.
mistakes felt
The boy who
human. Her
dreamed of
resilience
Nora
felt like a
Aunor,
lesson.
Yoso,
People who
some
witnessed
dreams
her
save
life,
us long
co-stars,
before we understand
directors,
why.
friends,
For a young
even
boy growing up in
strangers,
poverty in the Philippines,
spoke of her with a
that salvation
tenderness
came
that
in the form of a
confirmed
woman he
what I
never
always
met, a
sensed.
woman whose voice,
She was generous.
eyes,
She
and
was
truth
kind.
reached him
She was
through a
stubborn. She
flickering
was
television
flawed.
screen
She was
and changed
brilliant.
the course of his
She
life.
was real.
In this deeply
And in their
personal
stories,
and
I found
emotionally
pieces of the
resonant
woman
memoir,
behind the legend,
Nelson
the mother
Messias
who loved
traces
fiercely.
the invisible thread
Her
that
love for her
connected him
children,
to Nora Aunor,
Ian,
the
Lot,
Philippines'
Matet,
most
Kiko,
iconic and
Kenneth,
human national
was
artist.
complicated,
Through her
imperfect,
films,
but
the raw
undeniably
devotion
deep.
of Bona, the
She was not a
volcanic
perfect
honesty
mother,
of Ina
but she was a
Ka
mother who
ng Anak
tried.
Mo, the
A mother
haunting
who loved in the
injustice
ways
of
she knew
Bulaklak
how.
sa city jail,
A mother who
the
carried
moral
guilt,
weight of Tat Long
pride,
Tang Walang Diyos,
longing,
the
and
quiet
devotion
ache of
all at
Bakabuhaw
once.
Langit, and the spiritual
Classy 3,
devastation
The Boy
of
Who
Himala. He
Dreamed
found
of Nora
courage,
Aunor.
compassion,
Her relationship
mirror
with them taught
to
me
his own
something
struggles.
profound.
Raised in hardship,
Love is
shaped
not measured by
migration,
perfection.
and
Love is
strengthened by
measured by
survival,
presence,
Nelson writes
by
with a
effort,
voice that is both
by
tender
heart.
and unflinching. He
And she
explores
had
how
heart,
a child from the slums
more than most people
carried the
ever
light
understood.
of a superstar
The
into
artist who
adulthood.
gave everything.
How an immigrant learned to
Her
rebuild
craft was
himself
not
in
a
a foreign
job,
land,
it was her life.
and how grief
Her
transformed
golden
into
voice.
gratitude.
The one that
after the
won
passing of the
Tawag
woman
ng
who
Tanghalan.
unknowingly raised him.
The one that filled
This memoir
stadiums. The
is
one that
not a
became the
biography
soundtrack of
Nora
a
Aunor.
generation.
It is a
Was a
testament
gift she
to the
carried with
power
humility.
of connection. The
Her
kind
magnetic
that forms
eyes,
across
the eyes that
screens,
could break you without a
across
single
oceans,
word,
across
were the
lives.
soul of
It
Philippine
is a
cinema.
story about the
She was
people who shape
idolized.
us even
She
from
was
afar.
criticized.
The artists
She was
who give us
celebrated.
language for our pain.
She was
and
attacked.
the unexpected ways
She was lifted.
love can
She was
enter a
torn
life
down.
and stay there. Told
But
with humility,
through it all, she remained an
emotional
artist.
clarity, and the
Committed,
quiet dignity of someone who has lived
disciplined,
through storms.
fearless.
The boy who
She
dreamed
embodied
of
truth
Nora
in
Aunor
every role,
is a
even
celebration
when the
of
world
resilience,
refused to see her
memory,
truth in real life.
and the
In
enduring
chapter
power
30.
of art.
The
to
human
save
being
us.
behind the
It is
myth.
for the
What made
fans
me
who
love her
saw
most
themselves
was not
in
her
her eyes,
perfection,
for
but
the
her
dreamers
humanity.
who held on to
She was
hope,
strong,
and for
but she was
anyone
fragile.
who has ever been changed
She was
by a
generous,
story,
but she was
a performance,
wounded.
or a single
She was brilliant,
unforgettable voice.
but she was
A
lonely.
memoir of devotion,
She was
survival,
adored,
and the light
but
that
she was
never left him.
misunderstood.
The boy who dreamed of Nora
She was
Aunor,
iconic,
Yoso,
but she was
some
human.
dreams save us
And
long
that
before
humanity,
we understand why. For a young boy
Raw,
growing up in
unfiltered,
poverty in the Philippines,
unpolished,
that
was what
salvation
made her
came in the
unforgettable.
form of a woman he never met.
It was
a
what
woman
made her
whose
real.
voice,
It was what
eyes,
made her
and
mine, the
truth
love that needed
reached
no
him
meeting.
through a flickering television
People often
screen
say you
and changed the
cannot
course of
love
his
someone
life.
you never met.
In this deeply
But they
personal
are
and
wrong.
emotionally resonant
Love is
memoir,
not limited to
Nelson
physical
Messias
presence.
traces
Love
the
is
invisible
recognition.
thread that
Love is
connected him
resonance.
to Nora Aunor,
Love is the
the
quiet
Philippines'
understanding
most
that
iconic
some
and
One's
human
life
national
has
artist.
shaped your own.
Through her films, the raw
I loved her
devotion
because she
of
taught me
Bona,
strength.
the
I
volcanic
loved her because
honesty
she taught me
of
compassion.
Ina Ka ng Anak
I loved
Mo,
her because she taught
the
me
haunting
dignity.
injustice of
I loved her
Bulaklak
because
sa
she
city
taught me
jail,
truth.
the moral
I loved her
weight
because she
of
taught me to
Tatlong
survive.
Taong Walang Diyos,
I loved
the
her because she
quiet
taught me
ache
to
of
feel.
Bakibouhang
I loved her
Langit,
because she
and
taught
the
me to be
spiritual
human.
devastation of Himala.
And even
We
now,
found
after her
courage,
passing, after the
compassion,
grief,
and a
after the
mirror
healing,
to his own
165, the
struggles.
boy
Raised
who
in
dreamed of
hardship,
Nora Aunor, that
shaped
love
by
remains.
migration, and
Not as
strengthened by
longing,
survival.
not as
Nelson
pain,
writes with a voice that is
but as
both tender
gratitude.
and
The woman who
unflinching.
lives in my
He
heart,
explores
she was
how a
not
child
perfect,
from the
but
slums
she was real.
carried the light of a
And that is why she
superstar
lives
into
in me
adulthood.
still.
How an
In my
immigrant learned
memories,
to rebuild himself in a foreign
in my
land,
values, in my
and how
courage,
grief
in my
transformed
compass
into
silent,
gratitude
in my
after
story.
the passing of the woman who
I salute
unknowingly
her.
raised him.
I honor
This
her.
memoir
I
is not
empathize
a
with her. I
biography
idolize
of Nora
her.
Aunor.
I love her.
It is a
And I always
testament
will.
to the power
166,
of connection,
31,
the kind
chapter
that forms
31.
across screens,
The woman the world
across
saw,
oceans,
and the woman I
across
chose
lives.
to love.
It is a
Yes.
story about the people
I
who
went
shape
deeper
us
into the life
even
Nora
from
built
afar.
for herself.
The artists
I
who
realized
give
that
us
my
language
love
for,
for her
pain,
was not
the
based on
unexpected
fantasy.
ways love
It was based
can
on
enter
truth.
life and
The
stay
truth
there.
of a woman who
Told with
lived
humility,
fully, fought
emotional
fiercely,
clarity, and
loved
the quiet dignity
deeply,
of someone
and
who has
suffered
lived through
quietly.
storms. The boy
I didn't
who
know her
dreamed
personally,
of Nora Aunor is
but
a
I knew her through the
celebration
people who
of
did.
resilience,
The co-workers
memory,
who spoke
and
of
the
her
enduring
generosity,
power of art
the
to save
directors who
us.
praised her
It is for the
discipline,
fans who
the
saw
friends
themselves
who
in
witnessed her
eyes,
loneliness,
for the dreamers
the
who held on
children
to
who
hope,
carried her
and
love
for
in
anyone
complicated
who has
ways,
ever been changed
the
by a
fans who
story,
saw
a
themselves in her
performance,
eyes.
or a single
And through
unforgettable
them,
voice.
I came to
A
understand the
memoir of
woman
devotion,
behind the legend.
survival, and the
I
light
empathized
that
with
never
her.
left
I
him.
saluted
The
her.
boy who dreamed of Nora
I
Aunor,
idolized her.
Yoso.
I loved
Some
her.
dreams save us. Long
And more than
before
anything,
we
I
understand
honored
why.
her
For a young
humanity.
boy growing up in poverty in the
167.
Philippines,
The boy who
that
dreamed of
salvation
Nora
came in the
Aunor.
form of a woman he never
The
met,
stories
a
that
woman whose
revealed her
voice,
heart, people who
eyes,
truly knew her,
and
described a
truth
woman who was
reached him
generous
through a
without
flickering
announcing
television
it,
screen
humble
and
despite her
changed the
fame,
course of his life.
stubborn in her
In this deeply
convictions,
personal
fragile
and
in her
emotionally
quiet
resonant
moments,
memoir,
loyal to those she
Nelson
trusted,
Messias traces the
wounded by
invisible
those she
thread
loved,
that connected
brilliant in
him
her
to
craft,
Nora Aunor,
simple in her
the
needs.
Philippines' most
They spoke
iconic
of her
and human
kindness,
national artist.
the way she
Through
helped
her
crew
films,
members,
the raw
the way she
devotion
shared
of
food
Bona,
on set,
the volcanic
the way she
honesty
remembered
of
names,
Ina Ka ng
the
Anak
way she
Mo,
protected the
haunting
vulnerable.
injustice of Bulaklak
They spoke
sa
of her
city jail,
sadness,
the moral
the
weight
loneliness
of
that
Tatlong
followed her,
Taong Walang Diyos,
the betrayal
quiet
she
ache
endured,
of
the
Bakibouhang
weight of
Langit,
being
and the
misunderstood.
spiritual devastation of Himala.
They spoke of
He
her
found
truth,
courage,
the
compassion,
honesty in her
and a
eyes,
mirror
the
to his own
sincerity in her
struggles.
voice,
Raised
the
in
courage
hardship,
in her silence.
shaped by migration,
And in their stories, I
strengthened by
found the woman
survival,
I'd loved all my
Nelson
life,
writes with a voice
the mother
that is
who
both
loved
tender
imperfectly,
and
fiercely,
unflinching. He
honestly.
explores how a child
Her love for
from
her
the slums
children, Ian,
carried
Lot,
the
Lot,
light of a
Matet, Kiko,
superstar
Kenneth,
into adulthood.
was not a fairy
How an
tale.
immigrant learned
It
to
was
rebuild
real.
himself in a
It
foreign
was
land,
flawed.
and how
It
grief
was
transformed
human.
into
Chapter
gratitude
31.
after the passing of the woman
She
who
made
unknowingly
mistakes.
raised him.
She carried
This memoir
guilt.
is not
She
a
struggled
biography
with
of Nora
distance.
Aunor.
She
It is
fought
a
for
testament
connection.
to the power
She
of
loved them
connection,
in ways
the
she
kind that
didn't
forms
always know how
across
to
screens,
express.
across
But no one
oceans,
who truly
across
knew
lives.
her ever
It is
doubted
a
her
story
love,
about the people who shape
her devotion
us
to
even
Ian,
from afar.
her
The
pride in
artists who
Lot,
give us
Lot,
language
her
for our
tenderness
pain
toward Matet,
and the unexpected
her affection
ways
for
love
Kiko,
can enter
her quiet
life
care for
and
Kenneth.
stay there.
Her
Told
motherhood
with
was not
humility,
perfect, but it was
emotional clarity,
sincere.
and the quiet
And
dignity of
sincerity,
someone
I
who has
learned,
lived
is
through
more
storms.
powerful than
The
perfection.
boy who dreamed
The
of Nora
artist who
Aunor
became the
is a
standard.
celebration
Her
of
craft was her
resilience,
sanctuary.
memory,
Her
and the
performances
enduring
were her
power
truth.
of art
Her
to save
eyes
us.
were her
It is
language.
for the fans
Her voice
who
was
saw
her
themselves
soul.
in her
She was
eyes,
idolized.
for the
She
dreamers
was criticized.
who held on to hope,
She was
and
imitated.
for anyone
She was
who has
doubted.
ever been
She was
changed
celebrated.
by a
She was
story,
underestimated.
a performance,
She was
or a
unmatched.
single
Her golden
unforgettable
voice, clear,
A
haunting,
memoir of
unforgettable,
devotion,
was a gift
survival,
that shaped
and the
a
light that
generation.
never left him. The
Her
boy who
magnetic
dreamed of
eyes,
Nora Aunor,
capable of expressing
Yoso,
grief,
some dreams
rage,
save us,
love, and surrender
long
without a
before
single
we
word,
understand why.
became
For
the
a young boy
benchmark
growing
of
up in
Filipino
poverty in the
acting.
Philippines, that
She
salvation
embodied
came
the
in
true
form of a
artist.
woman he never met,
Not because
a
she was
woman whose
perfect,
voice,
but because she
eyes,
was honest.
and truth reached him
169, The Boy Who Dreamed of Nora Aunor.
And changed the course of his life.
And honesty in art
deeply
is
personal
rare.
and
The
emotionally
human being who
resonant
made me
memoir,
believe in
Nelson
humanity.
Messias traces
What made
the
me love her
invisible
most
thread
was not her
that connected
fame,
him
not her
to Nora
awards,
Aunor,
not her
the Philippines'
iconic
most
roles.
iconic and
It
human
was her
national
humanity,
artist. Through
her
her
weaknesses,
films,
her
the raw
mistakes,
devotion of
her
Roma,
vulnerability, her
the
courage, her
volcanic
contradictions,
honesty
her
of
truth.
Ina Ka ng Anak
She was
Mo,
not a saint.
the
She was
haunting
not a myth.
injustice
She was
of
not a
Bulaklak,
flawless
the city jail,
icon. She was
the
a human
moral
being,
weight of Tatlang
brilliant,
Taong
wounded,
Walang Diyos,
resilient,
the quiet
real.
ache of Bakit
And that is why
Bughang
she lived in
Langit,
my heart so
and the
deeply.
spiritual devastation of
Because she
Himala.
reminded
He
me
found
that
courage,
greatness does not
compassion,
require
and a
perfection. It
mirror
requires
to his own
authenticity.
struggles. Raised
and
in
she had
hardship,
authenticity
shaped by
in
migration,
every breath,
and
the love
strengthened
that
by
needed no
survival,
meeting.
Nelson writes with a
I never
voice
met
that is
her,
both tender
but I didn't
and
need to.
unflinching.
Love does
He
not
explores
require
how a child
proximity.
from the slums
Love requires
carried the light
recognition.
of a superstar into
And I
adulthood,
recognized her
how an
in
immigrant
her
learned to
eyes, in her
rebuild
voice, in
himself
her
in a
silence.
foreign land, and how
And in
grief
chapter
transformed
31,
into gratitude
in her flaws,
after the passing
in her
of the
strength,
woman
in
who
her
unknowingly
humanity.
raised him. This
I
memoir
loved her because
is
she
not a
reflected the
biography
parts of
Nora
myself I
Aunor.
was too
It is
afraid
a
to
testament
face.
to the power
I loved her
of
because she
connection,
taught me how
the
to
kind that
survive.
forms across
I
screens,
loved her because she taught me
across
how to
oceans,
feel. I
across
loved her
lives.
because she
It
taught
is
me
a
how to
story about the
forgive.
people
I
who
loved
shape
her because
us
she taught me
even
how to
from
be
afar.
human.
The
And
artists
even
who
now,
give us
after her
language for our
passing, that
pain
love
and
remains.
the unexpected ways
Not as grief,
love
but as
can
gratitude,
enter a
the
life
woman who lives
and
in my
stay
heart
there.
forever.
Told with humility,
She was not
emotional
perfect,
clarity,
but she
and
was
the quiet
true.
dignity of someone
And
who
truth
has
is
lived through
eternal.
storms. The boy
She
who
lives in my
dreamed of
memories,
Nora
she
Aunor
lives in my
is a
values, she
celebration
lives in my
of
courage, she
resilience,
lives in my
memory,
compassion,
and the
she lives in my
enduring
story.
power of art
I
to
empathize
save
with her,
us.
I salute
It
her,
is
I
for the
idolize
fans
her, I
who
love
saw
her,
themselves in her
and
eyes,
I always will.
for the dreamers who held on to hope, and for
171:32,
anyone
chapter
who has ever
32.
been changed by
My
a
place
story,
in her
a
story and
performance,
hers in
or a
mine.
single
T, here are
unforgettable
people
voice.
we meet
A
once.
memoir of devotion,
There are people we meet
survival,
often.
and the light that never left
And there are
him.
people we
The
never
boy
meet
who
at
dreamed of
all.
Nora Aunor.
Yet they
So,
shape us more
some
deeply
dreams save
than
us
anyone else.
long before we understand
Nora
why.
was that
For a young
person
boy
for me.
growing up in poverty in the
I
Philippines,
was never part of her
that
inner
salvation
circle.
came in the
I never
form of a
stood
woman he
beside
never
her on
met,
a set.
a woman whose voice,
I never heard her laugh
eyes,
in person.
and truth
I never saw her
reached him
eyes without a
through
screen
a
between
flickering
us.
television screen and
And yet
changed the
somehow
course of his life.
she became one of the
In this
most
deeply
important
personal
presences in my
and
life.
emotionally resonant memoir,
Not because she
Nelson
knew me,
Messias
but because she
traces
understood
the
me.
invisible thread
Through her
that connected
roles,
him
through her
to Nora
truth,
Aunor,
through her
the Philippines'
humanity.
most iconic and
And
human
I understood
national
her.
artist.
Through
Through her
empathy,
films,
through
the raw
devotion,
devotion
through the
of Bona,
stories of those
the
who
volcanic
truly knew
honesty
her.
of Ina
Chapter
Ka ng
32.
Anak Mo,
The invisible
haunting
thread that
injustice
connected
of
us.
Bulaklak
Some connections don't need
jail,
proximity.
the moral
Some
weight
bonds
of
don't need
Tatlong
conversation.
Taong Walang Diyos,
Some
the
loves
quiet
don't need
ache
permission.
of Bakibuhang
My connection
Langit,
to her was
and the
quiet,
spiritual
but it was
devastation
real.
of Himala. He
It
found
lived in the way I
courage,
saw
compassion,
myself
and a
in
mirror
her struggles.
to his
It
own
lived in
struggles.
the way her
Raised in
triumphs
hardship,
felt like my own.
shaped by
It lived in the
migration,
way her
and
sadness
strengthened by
echoed my
survival,
childhood.
Nelson
It
writes
lived in
with
the
a
way
voice
her
that is both
strength
tender
taught me
and
survival.
unflinching.
It lived
He
in the way
explores how
her
a
flaws
child
taught me
from the
compassion.
slums carried the light
She
of a
didn't know I
superstar
existed,
into adulthood.
but she
How an
shaped the
immigrant
man I
learned to
became.
rebuild himself in a foreign
And that is a
land,
connection
and how
deeper than
grief transformed
familiarity,
into
is
gratitude
recognition.
after
The
the
stories
passing
of
of the woman
others that
who
completed
unknowingly
the
raised him.
picture. I
This
learned her through
memoir
the
is
people who
not a
walked beside
biography
her,
of Nora Aunor.
co-stars
It is
who
a
admired
testament
her
to the
discipline,
power of
directors
connection,
who
the
trusted
kind
her
that forms
instincts,
across screens,
friends who witnessed her
across
loneliness,
oceans,
to
across
fans who
lives.
saw
It is a
themselves in her
story
eyes,
about the people
children
who
who
shape
carried
us
her love
even
in
from
complicated
afar.
ways.
The artists who give us
Their
language
stories
for our
filled the
pain,
spaces I
and
could
the
never
unexpected
reach.
ways love
Their
can enter a
memories
life and stay
completed the
there.
portrait I
Told
carried
with
in my
humility,
heart.
emotional clarity,
They spoke of her
and the quiet
generosity,
dignity of someone who has lived through
quiet,
storms. The boy who dreamed of Nora
unpublicized,
Aunor is a celebration
sincere.
of resilience,
173.
memory, and the enduring
The
power
boy
of
who
art
dreamed of
to save us.
Nora
It is for the
Aunor.
fans who saw
They
themselves
spoke
in
of
her
her
eyes,
sadness,
for the dreamers who held
the
on to
kind
hope,
that comes
and
from
for
being
anyone who has
misunderstood.
ever been changed
They
by a
spoke of her
story, a
strength,
performance,
the
or a
kind that
single
comes from
unforgettable
surviving
voice.
storms
A
alone.
memoir of devotion,
They spoke of her
survival,
truth,
and the light that never
the
left him.
kind that
The boy who
cannot
dreamed
be
of Nora
faked.
Aunor.
And
Yoso,
through them,
some
I
dreams
found
save
my
us
place in her
long
story,
before we
not
understand why.
as someone who
For a young
knew
boy
her,
growing up in poverty
but
in
as
the
someone
Philippines,
who
that
understood her, the
salvation
love
came
that
in the form
asked
of a
for
woman
nothing in
he never
return.
met, a
My love
woman
for her
whose
was simple.
voice,
It asked for nothing.
eyes,
It demanded
and
nothing.
truth
It expected
reached him
nothing.
through a
It
flickering
was not the
television
love of a
screen
fan
and
chasing
changed the course of
autographs.
his life.
It was not
In
the
this
love of
deeply
a
personal
follower seeking
and emotionally
attention.
resonant memoir,
It was not the love of
Nelson
someone wanting to be
Messias
seen.
traces the
It
invisible
was the love
thread
of someone who
that connected him
recognized
to
a
Nora
soul
Aunor,
that mirrored
the
his own.
Philippines' most iconic
Her
and human
flaws made
national
her
artist.
human.
Through her films,
Her humanity
the raw
made her
devotion
beautiful.
of Bona,
Her beauty made
the
her
volcanic
unforgettable.
honesty of Ina
And my
Ka
love for
ng Anak
her,
Mo, the
quiet,
haunting
steady,
injustice
lifelong,
of Bulaklak
became
City
part of my
Jail,
identity.
the moral weight
Chapter
of
32.
Tatlong Taong
The
Walang
legacy
Diyos,
she left in in
The
me.
quiet
Her legacy
ache
is not
of
just
Bakibu
in her
Haung
films.
Langit,
It is
the
not just in
spiritual
her
devastation
awards.
of Himala
It is not
found
just in the
courage,
title
compassion,
National Artist.
and a mirror
Her
to his own
legacy lives in the
struggles.
people she
Raised in
touched,
hardship,
in the hearts
shaped
she
by
softened,
migration,
in the
and
courage she
strengthened by
inspired,
survival,
in the
Nelson writes with a
dignity
voice
she
that is both
embodied,
tender
in
and
the truth
unflinching.
she
He
carried.
explores how a child
And I am one
from
of
the
those
slums
people.
carried the light
She
of a
taught me
superstar into adulthood.
to feel deeply,
How an
to
immigrant
forgive
learned to rebuild
gently,
himself in a
to
foreign
endure
land,
quietly,
and how
to love
grief
honestly,
transformed
to
into
live
gratitude.
truthfully.
after the
She
passing of the
shaped
woman
my
who unknowingly
values.
raised
She
him.
shaped my
This memoir
compassion.
is not
She
a
shaped my
biography of Nora
resilience.
Aunor.
She
It is a
shaped my
testament to
understanding
the
of
power
humanity. She
of
shaped
connection,
me.
the kind that
The
forms
story that
across
belongs to
screens,
both of us.
across
This book is
oceans,
not just about
across
her.
lives.
It is about the
story about
space where her
people who
life and
shape
mine
us even
intersected.
from afar.
The invisible
The
place
artists
where
who give us language
admiration
for our
becomes
pain,
devotion,
and the unexpected
where empathy
ways
becomes
love can
understanding,
enter a life
where a
and stay
stranger
there.
becomes a guide.
Told with humility,
75.
emotional clarity, and
The
the
boy
quiet
Baba who
dignity of
dreamed of
someone who
Nora
has lived
Aunor.
through storms. The
She
boy
never
who
knew me,
dreamed of Nora
but she
Aunor
changed me, and
is a
that is enough.
celebration of resilience,
Because some stories are not
memory,
about meeting.
and the enduring
Some stories
power
are
of
about
art
meaning.
to save us.
And
It is
she will
for the
always
fans
be the
who
woman
saw
whose
themselves
meaning
in
lives
her
in my
eyes,
heart.
for the dreamers who held on to hope, and for anyone who has ever been changed by a story,
Chapter
a
33.
performance, or a single
The life I
unforgettable
continue
voice.
and the love that
A memoir
stays.
of devotion,
Here comes a point in
survival,
every
and
long
the
journey
light
when you
that
stop
never left
looking
him.
back with
The
pain
boy
and
who
start
dreamed of
looking
Nora
back with
Aunor.
understanding.
Yoso.
By
Some
this
dreams
chapter
save
of my
us,
life, I
long
realized that
before we
my
understand
love for
why.
Nora
For a young
had
boy growing up in
transformed
poverty in the
into something
Philippines,
quieter,
that salvation came
something
in the form of a
steadier,
woman he never met, a
something
woman
that
whose
no
voice,
longer hurt.
eyes,
It had become
and
part of
truth
me,
reached
woven
him
into
through
my
a flickering
values,
television
my
screen and changed the course of his life.
my
In this deeply
resilience,
personal and
my way of
emotionally
seeing the
resonant
world.
memoir, Nelson
I no
Messias
longer carried her
traces
as
the
a wound.
invisible thread that
I
connected
carried
him
her as
to
a
Nora
truth,
Aunor,
the
the
acceptance
Philippines'
that
most
finally
iconic
arrived.
and human national artist.
Acceptance
Through her
didn't come
films, the raw
suddenly.
devotion of Bona,
It arrived
the
slowly,
volcanic
like
honesty
dawn creeping
of
into a
Ina
dark
Ka
room
ng
on
anak mo,
77.
the haunting
Boy
injustice
who
of
dreamed of Nora
Bulaklak
Aunor.
City Jail, the
It
moral
came in
weight of
moments.
Tatlong Taong Walang
When I could
Diyos,
watch her
the
films
quiet
again
ache
without
of
crying.
Bakibuhaong Langit,
When I could speak
and
her
the
name with
spiritual
warmth
devastation
instead of ache.
Himala, he found
When I could
courage,
remember her flaws without
compassion,
judgment.
and a
When I could
mirror
honor her
to his own
humanity without
struggles. Raised in
idealizing
hardship,
her. When I could
shaped
feel
by
gratitude
migration,
instead of
and
loss.
strengthened by survival, Nelson
Acceptance
writes with a
didn't
voice that
erase
is
the
both
love.
tender
It
and
deepened it.
unflinching.
It
He
allowed me to
explores how
see
a
her not as a
child
myth,
from the slums
not as a symbol,
carried the light of
but
a
as a
superstar
woman.
into adulthood.
Brilliant,
How an
wounded,
immigrant learned to rebuild himself
courageous,
in a foreign land,
real.
and how grief
And
transformed
in accepting
into
her humanity,
gratitude after the
I learned
passing
to
of the
accept
woman
my
who
own, the
unknowingly
love that
raised
no
him.
longer needed
This
answers.
memoir
For
is
years,
not a
I carried
biography of
questions.
Nora Aunor.
Why did
It
I
is a
love her so
testament to the
deeply?
power
Why
of
did her
connection, the
sadness
kind that
feel like
forms
mine?
across screens,
Why did her
across
triumphs
oceans,
lift me?
across lives.
Why did her flaws
It is a
soften
story
me?
about the people who
Why did her
shape us
passing break
even
me?
from afar.
But by
The
this
artists who
chapter, I
give us
no longer
language for our
needed
pain
answers.
and the unexpected
Love
ways
does not
love
always
can
explain
enter a
itself.
life and stay there.
Sometimes it
Told
simply
with humility,
exists,
emotional
quietly,
clarity,
faithfully,
and the quiet dignity of someone who has lived
truthfully.
through storms. The
My
boy
love
who
for her
dreamed
was
of
not
Nora
based
Aunor
on meeting her
is a
or
celebration
knowing
of
her
resilience,
or being known in
memory,
return.
and the enduring
Chapter
power of
33
art to save us. It is for the
was
fans
based on
who saw
recognition,
themselves in her eyes,
the recognition of
for
a
the
soul
dreamers
that
who held
mirrored
on to
my
hope,
own.
and for
And
anyone
that was enough.
who has ever
The
been changed
continuation
by a
of my
story,
life with
a
her light
performance,
beside me,
or a
life
single
continued.
unforgettable voice.
Not in spite of
a
her
memoir
absence,
of devotion,
but with her
survival,
presence carried
and the
differently.
light that never left him.
I woke
The
up
boy
each
who
day with a
dreamed of
sense
Nora
of
Aunor.
calm.
Yoso,
I moved through
some
the
dreams
world
save us,
with more
long
gentleness.
before we
I
understand
spoke
why.
with more
For a young
honesty.
boy growing up in poverty
I
in the
forgave more
Philippines,
easily.
that salvation
I loved
came
more
in the form
deeply.
of a woman he never
I endured
met, a
more
woman
quietly.
whose voice,
These were not
eyes,
traits I
and
invented.
truth reached
These were
him
gifts
through a
she left
flickering
me.
television screen.
Her
and
legacy
changed
was
the
not
course
just
of
in
his life.
cinema. It was in the
deeply
lives she
personal
shaped,
and
in the
emotionally
heart she
resonant memoir.
softened, in the
Nelson
courage she
Messias
inspired,
traces the
in the
invisible
compassion
thread
she
that
awakened.
connected him
And I was
to
one of
Nora
those
Aunor,
lives.
the Philippines' most
The strength I
iconic
found in
and
her
human
humanity.
national artist.
Her
Through
brilliance
films,
taught me to
the raw
dream.
devotion of Bona,
Her flaws taught me
the
to forgive.
volcanic honesty
Her
of
downfall
Ina Ka
taught me to
ng anak
endure.
mo, the
Her
haunting
resilience
injustice of
taught me to
Bulaklak
rise.
City Jail, the
Her
moral
passing
weight
taught me
of
to let go.
Tatlong Taong Walang Diyos,
Her legacy
the
taught me
quiet
to
ache
continue.
of Bakibuhaong Langit,
But it was her
and the
humanity,
spiritual devastation of
raw,
Himala. He found
imperfect,
courage,
unguarded,
compassion,
that
and a
79, the
mirror
boy who
to
dreamed
his
of
own
Nora
struggles.
Aunor,
Raised in
taught me the
hardship,
most important
shaped
lesson.
by migration, and
You do not
strengthened by
need to be
survival,
perfect to be
Nelson
loved.
writes with a
You only
voice that
need
is
to be
both
true.
tender
And in learning that,
unflinching.
I found a
He
strength I had
explores how
never
a child
known.
from the slums
A strength that
carried the
allowed
light
me
of
to
a
live my
superstar
own
into
life with
adulthood.
dignity, with
How an
clarity,
immigrant learned to
with
rebuild
peace.
himself in a foreign land.
The love that
and how
lives without
grief
pain. By
transformed
this
into
chapter, I
gratitude
understood something
after the
profound.
passing of the woman who
Love
unknowingly
does
raised
not
him.
end when a
This
person
memoir
leaves.
is not a
Love
biography
ends
of
when
Nora
it
Aunor.
stops growing.
It is a testament to the power
And my love for her
of connection,
never
the
stopped
kind that
growing.
forms across
It
screens,
simply changed
across oceans,
shape.
across lives.
It became
It
quieter.
is a story about the people
became
who
deeper.
shape us even
It
from
became
afar.
steadier.
The artists
It
who
became
give us
part of who I
language for our
am.
pain, and the
She no
unexpected
longer
ways
lived in my grief.
love can enter a
She lived in my
life and stay
gratitude.
there.
She no
Told
longer
with
lived in my
humility,
longing. She
emotional
lived in my
clarity,
strength.
and the quiet
She no
dignity
longer
of
lived
someone
in
who
my
has lived through
sorrow.
storms.
She
The
lived in my
Boy Who
story,
Dreamed of Nora
and that,
Aunor
I realized,
is a
was the
celebration
truest form of love.
resilience,
The kind that stays
memory,
without hurting.
and the enduring power
Chapter
of art
34,
to save us.
The Light That
It is for the
Stays
fans
Long
who
After the
saw
Curtain
themselves in
Falls.
her eyes, for the dreamers who
The very
held on to
story
hope,
has an ending.
and for anyone
But not
who
every
has ever
ending
been
feels like
changed
goodbye.
by a story,
As I reach
a
this
performance,
chapter of my
or a
life,
single
older,
unforgettable
steadier,
voice.
gentler,
A memoir of devotion,
I realized that my journey with
survival,
Nora was
and
never
a
meant
light
to end
that
with her
never left
passing.
him. The Boy
Her
Who
life
Dreamed of
shaped
Nora
me.
Aunor.
Her art
So,
raised me.
some dreams save
Her
us
humanity
long
softened me.
before we understand why.
Her flaws
For a young
humbled
boy
me.
growing up in
Her
poverty in the
strength guided me.
Philippines,
Her
that
truth
salvation
awakened
came
me.
in the form of a woman he
And
never
now,
met,
as
a
I
woman
stand at the
whose
quiet
voice,
edge of this memoir, I
eyes,
understand
and
something I
truth
could not see
reached him
before.
through a flickering
She was
television
never just a
screen
star
and changed the
I
course of his
admired.
life. In this deeply
She became
personal
part of the
and
person I
emotionally
became.
resonant memoir,
181,
Nelson
The Boy Who
Messias
Dreamed of Nora
traces the
Aunor.
invisible thread
The
that
woman who
connected him
lived
to
beyond the
Nora
screen,
Aunor,
I
the
loved her
Philippines'
without
most
knowing her.
iconic and human
I
national
understood
artist.
her without meeting
Through
her.
her films, the raw
I carried her
devotion
without
of
asking
Bona,
permission.
the volcanic
And through the
honesty
stories of those who
Ina
truly
Ka
knew
ng
her,
Anak Mo,
the kindness
the
she
haunting
showed,
injustice
the
of
generosity
Bulaklak
she
sa city
offered,
jail,
the sadness
moral
she
weight
endured,
of Tatlong
the
Taong
triumphs
Walang
she
Diyos,
earned,
the
the
quiet
love
ache
she gave her
of
children,
Bakabuhaong
the
Langit,
loyalty she held
and
for
the spiritual
friends.
devastation of Himala,
I discovered
he
the
found
woman
courage,
behind the legend.
compassion, and
She
a
was not
mirror
perfect.
to his own
She was
struggles.
human,
Raised in
and that
hardship,
humanity was her
shaped
greatest
by
gift.
migration,
The legacy
and
that
strengthened
lives
by
in the
survival,
hearts. She touched her
Nelson writes with a
legacy is
voice
not
that
just
is
in the
both
films she
tender
made.
and
It is
unflinching.
not just in the
He
awards
explores
she
how a child
received.
from the slums
It is not just in the
carried
title,
light of a
national
superstar
artist.
into adulthood.
Her
How an
legacy
immigrant
lives in
learned to rebuild
the
himself
fans
in a
who grew up
foreign
with her,
land,
the
and how
artists
grief
she inspired,
transformed into
the children
gratitude
she loved,
after the
the
passing
people
of the
she
woman
helped
who unknowingly
quietly,
raised
the
him.
nation she
This memoir
reflected,
is not a
the hearts she
biography of
softened,
Nora Aunor.
the
It is a
souls
testament to
she
the
awakened.
power of connection, the
And
kind
I
that
am
forms
one of those
across
hearts,
screens,
one of those
across
souls, one of
oceans,
those.
across
82,
lives.
chapter
It is
34.
a story about the people who
Lives
shape
forever
us
changed.
even from afar.
Her story became
The
part of
artists
my
who give us
story.
language for our
Her
pain,
truth became part
the
of my
unexpected
truth.
ways love
Her light
can
became
enter a
part of
life
my
and
path.
stay there.
The love that
Told with
outlived
humility,
loss. Loving her was
emotional
never about
clarity,
meeting her.
and the quiet
It was
dignity
about
of someone who has
recognizing
lived through
something
storms.
familiar in her
The
eyes.
Boy Who Dreamed
A
of Nora
loneliness I
Aunor
understood.
is a celebration
A strength
of
I
resilience,
admired. A truth I
memory,
needed.
and the enduring
When she
power
passed
of
away,
art
I thought the
to
love
save
would
us.
break me.
It is for the fans
But
who saw
instead, it
themselves in her
transformed
eyes,
me.
for the dreamers
It became
who held on to
gratitude.
hope, and for anyone
It became
who has
peace.
ever been changed by a
It
story,
became
a
a
performance,
quiet
or a
devotion that no
single
longer hurt.
unforgettable
She
voice.
no longer
A
lived in my
memoir of
grief.
devotion,
She lived in my heart.
survival,
And that is
the
where she
light
will
that
remain
never
in the
left
life
him.
I continue,
The Boy
with
Who
her light
Dreamed of
inside
Nora
me.
Aunor. Yoso.
As I move forward
Some dreams
into the
save
years
us,
ahead, into
long
the
before
quiet
we understand
mornings,
why.
into the gentle
For a young
days,
boy growing up in
I
poverty
carry
in the
her with me.
Philippines, that salvation
Not as an
came in the
idol,
form of
not
a
as a
woman he never
myth,
met,
not
a
as a
woman whose
perfect
voice,
figure, but as a
eyes,
reminder.
and truth reached
183,
him through a
The
flickering
Boy Who
television
Dreamed of
screen
Nora
and
Aunor.
changed the course of his life.
To live
In this
with
deeply
truth,
personal
to love
and
with
emotionally
courage, to
resonant
forgive with
memoir,
compassion,
Nelson
to
Messias
endure with
traces
dignity,
the invisible
to be
thread
human,
that connected
fully
him
and
to Nora
honestly.
Aunor,
These were the
the
lessons she
Philippines'
left
most
me.
iconic and
These were the
human
gifts she
national
gave
artist.
me.
Through
These
her
were the
films,
lights she
the raw
planted in my
devotion of
soul.
Bona,
And
the
I continue
volcanic
my life
honesty
with those
of
lights
Ina
guiding me.
Ka ng Anak Mo,
The ending
the
that
haunting
isn't an ending.
injustice of Bulaklak
This
City
chapter
Jail,
is the end of the
the
book,
moral weight
but
of
it is not the
Tatlong
end of the
Taong Walang
story,
Diyos,
because
the
her
quiet
story
ache
continues
of Bakabuhaong
in the
Langit,
people she
and the
touched.
spiritual devastation
And
of
my
Himala.
story
He found
continues with the
courage,
strength she helped me
compassion,
build.
and a mirror
The curtain has
to his own
fallen.
struggles.
The
Raised in
applause has
hardship,
faded.
shaped
The
by
lights have
migration,
dimmed.
and strengthened by survival,
But the truth
Nelson
remains.
writes with a voice that is both
She
tender
lives on.
and unflinching.
In
He
her
explores
art,
how a
in her
child
children,
from the
in her
slums
fans,
carried the
in her
light
nation,
of a superstar
in
into
me.
adulthood. How an
And as long
immigrant
as I
learned to
carry her
rebuild
memory
himself
with
in a foreign
gentleness,
land, and how
as
grief
long as I honor
transformed
her
into
humanity
gratitude
with honesty,
after the passing of the woman
as
who
long as I
unknowingly
live my
raised
life
him.
with the
This
dignity she
memoir
taught
is
me.
not a biography of
184,
Nora
chapter
Aunor.
34.
It is a testament to the power
Her light will never
of connection,
fade.
the kind that
This is
forms
not
across
goodbye. This
screens,
is gratitude.
across oceans,
This is
across
continuation.
lives. It
This
is a
is
story
love
about
that
the people
endures.
who shape us even
85
from afar.
epilogue, The Light
The
that
artists
remains.
who who give us language for our
In
pain,
the quiet moments of
and
my
the
life,
unexpected ways
the early
love
mornings, the
can
soft
enter a
evenings,
life
the
and
pauses
stay
between
there.
one breath and the
Told with
next,
humility,
I still feel her
emotional clarity,
presence.
and
Not
the
as
quiet
grief,
dignity
not
of
as
someone who has
longing,
lived
but
through
as
storms.
light.
The
A light
boy
that
who
guided
dreamed
me
of
through
Nora
childhood
Aunor
poverty.
is a
A light that
celebration
stayed
of
with me
resilience,
through migration
memory,
and survival.
and the enduring power
A light
of
that
art
comforted
to
me
save
through
us.
heartbreak.
It is for the
A
fans
light
who
that
saw
softened
themselves
me
in
through
her
loss.
eyes, for the dreamers
A
who
light
held
that
on to
taught me how
hope,
to live with
and for
truth,
anyone who has
how to
ever
love
been
with
changed by
courage,
a
how to
story,
endure
a
with
performance,
dignity.
or a single
I never
unforgettable
met her,
voice. A memoir
but she
of
shaped me.
devotion, survival,
I never
and
heard
the
her
light
voice in
that never
person,
left him. The boy who
but it
dreamed of
echoed
Nora
in my
Aunor,
life.
Yoso,
I never
Some
stood
Dreams
beside
Save
her,
Us, long
But
before
she
we
walked
understand
beside me.
why. For a young
And now,
boy growing
as I
up in
close
poverty
this
in the
book,
Philippines,
not with
that
sadness,
salvation came
but
in
with
the form of a
gratitude,
woman he never met.
I
a
understand
woman
that
whose
her
voice,
story and mine will
eyes,
always be
and
intertwined.
truth reached him
86.
through a flickering television screen
Epilogue.
and changed
She
the
lives
course of
on
his
in
life.
her children.
In this deeply
She lives on
personal
in her
and
fans.
emotionally resonant
She lives on
memoir,
in her nation.
Nelson Messias
She lives on in her
traces
art.
the invisible
She lives
thread
on in
that
me.
connected him to
The
Nora
curtain has
Aunor,
fallen,
the Philippines'
but the
most
light
iconic
remains.
and human national artist.
7. Selected
Through her
filmography
films,
of Nora
the raw
Aunor.
devotion
Top
of Bona,
12 essential.
the volcanic honesty
Nora
of
Aunor
Ina
films.
Ka ng Anak Mo,
1.
the haunting
Himala,
injustice
1982.
of Bulaklak sa city jail,
Her defining
the moral
role.
weight of
A performance built on restraint,
the quiet
silence,
ache
and spiritual
of
weight.
Bakabuhaong Langit, and the
Elsa
spiritual
remains
devastation
one
of
of the
Himala.
greatest
He found
characters in
courage,
world cinema. 2.
compassion, and a mirror
Tatlong Taong
to his
Walang
own
Diyos,
struggles. Raised in hardship,
1976.
shaped by
A
migration,
wartime
and strengthened by
masterpiece.
survival,
Her
Nelson
portrayal
writes
of a
with
woman
voice that is
torn
both
between
tender
shame and
and
survival.
unflinching. He
It's
explores how a
devastating,
child
timeless.
from the
3.
slums
Minsa
carried the
Isang
light of a
Gamu-Gamu,
superstar into adulthood.
1976.
How an immigrant
A
learned to
national
rebuild
mirror.
himself in a foreign land.
Her performance
and how
exposed the
grief
wounds of
transformed into
colonialism
gratitude
and the Filipino
after the
struggle
passing
for
of the woman
dignity.
who unknowingly raised him.
188.
This memoir
Selected
is not
filmography
a biography
of Nora Aunor.
It is a testament
4.
to the power
Bulaklak,
of
sa
connection,
city
the
jail.
kind that forms across screens,
1984.
across oceans,
One of her
across
most
lives.
haunting
It is a
roles.
story about the people who shape
She
us
embodied the
even from
forgotten
afar.
women of
The
society with
artists who give us
heartbreaking
language
truth.
for our pain
5.
and the
Ina
unexpected
Ka
ways
ng
love
Anak Mo,
can enter a life and stay
1979.
there. Told with
A
humility,
volcanic,
emotional
emotionally
clarity,
explosive
and the
performance.
quiet dignity of
Her
someone who has lived through storms.
confrontations with Lolita
The boy who
Rodriguez are
dreamed of
legendary.
Nora Aunor
2
is a
titans of acting in a
celebration
battle of
resilience,
truth, betrayal,
memory,
and motherhood.
and the enduring power
6.
of art
Honey,
to save us.
1980.
It is for the fans who
A
saw
raw,
themselves
painful
in her
portrait
eyes,
of devotion
for the
and
dreamers who held
self-destruction.
on to hope.
Her
And for
performance
anyone
as
who
Bona,
has ever been
a young woman
changed
who
by a
gives
story,
everything to a man who gives
performance,
nothing
or
in
a
return,
single
is one of the
unforgettable
most
voice.
emotionally
A
honest
memoir of
roles in
devotion,
Philippine cinema.
survival,
Her final
and the
scene,
light that
trembling
never
with
left.
rage and
The boy
heartbreak,
who
is
dreamed of Nora
unforgettable.
Aunor, Yoso.
7.
Some dreams save
Bakit
us
Bughaw
long
ang
before
Langit,
we understand why.
1981.
For a young boy growing up in poverty
A
in the
quiet,
Philippines,
aching
that
portrait
salvation
of
came in the
loneliness.
form of a woman he never met.
Her
a woman
eyes
whose
carried the
voice,
entire emotional
eyes,
weight of the
and
film.
truth
Oh,
reached him through a
Atsai.
flickering television screen and changed the course of his life.
A
In this
role
deeply
defined by
personal
silence
and
and
emotionally
dignity.
resonant memoir,
She
Nelson
portrayed the
Messias
life of a
traces the
domestic
invisible
helper
thread
with
that connected him
humility
to Nora
and
Aunor,
emotional
the Philippines'
precision.
most iconic and human national artist.
9.
Through her films, the
Tinik
raw
sa
devotion
Dibdib,
of Bona,
1985.
the volcanic honesty of
A
Ina
painful,
Ka
honest
ng Anak
portrayal
Mo,
of a woman
the
trapped in
haunting
emotional and
injustice
economic
of Bulaklak sa
abuse.
city jail.
One of her
The
most
moral weight
emotionally
of
raw
Tatlong Taong Walang
performances.
Diyos,
10.
the quiet
The
ache
Flor
of
Contemplacion
Bakabuhaong
story,
Langit,
1990,
and the spiritual
a role
devastation
that
of
earned her
Himala. He
international
found
acclaim.
courage, compassion,
She honored the
and a
OFW
mirror
struggle with
to his own
dignity,
struggles.
restraint, and
Raised in
heartbreaking
hardship,
truth.
shaped by
11. Thy
migration,
Womb,
and
2012,
strengthened by
late career
survival,
masterpiece.
Nelson writes with a
Quiet,
voice that is
spiritual,
both
and
tender
deeply human,
and
proof that
unflinching.
her
He
artistry only grew
explores how a
stronger
child
with age.
from the slums
12.
carried the
Bakit
light of a
May Kahapon
superstar
Pa,
into adulthood.
1996. A
How
film
an
about
immigrant
trauma,
learned to
memory,
rebuild
and
himself in a
justice.
foreign land.
She carried
And
both
how
fire
grief
and silence
transformed
with equal
into
power.
gratitude after
190.
the passing of the woman who unknowingly
About the
raised
author.
him. This memoir
Nelson
is not
Macias is a
biography
Filipino
of Nora
writer,
Aunor.
artist,
It is
and
a
front desk
testament to the
professional
power
based in
of
Victoria,
connection,
British
the kind
Columbia.
that forms across screens,
Raised in poverty
across
and
oceans,
strengthened by
across
migration,
lives.
he writes
It is
with a
story
voice
about the people
shaped
who
by
shape us
resilience,
even from afar.
humility,
The
and
artists who
deep
give us
emotional
language for our
truth.
pain, and the
His work
unexpected
blends
ways
memoir,
love can
cultural
enter a life
reflection,
and stay there.
and the quiet
Told with
dignity
humility,
of everyday life.
emotional clarity,
A
and the
lifelong
quiet dignity
admirer
someone
of
who has lived
Nora
through storms.
Aunor,
The boy
Nelson's
who dreamed
storytelling
of Nora Aunor
honors the
is a
humanity
celebration
of those who
of
shaped him.
resilience,
From the
memory,
superstar,
and the enduring
who guided
power
his
of art
courage,
to save
to the
us.
mother
It is
who
for
shaped
the
his
fans
strength.
who saw themselves in her
This
eyes.
is his most
For the
personal work
dreamers
to date.
who held on to hope.
91.
And for anyone